If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
You are listening to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. And today we are tackling the baffling, enduring mystery that is the disappearance of Johnny Gosch. The Johnny Gosch case is a staple in the true crime community. One of these main loss of innocence cases from decades ago that kind of changed the modern world in terms of bringing the possibility that kids could be kidnapped more mainstream. Obviously, kids have been getting kidnapped for a very long time, but to the extent that it's been brought into the sphere of public consciousness, there's not a lot of cases that have done that, but Johnny Gosch's case certainly did. So we will be doing a deep dive in typical Mindshock fashion with logic and reason at the forefront in an attempt to decipher what really happened to Johnny Gosch. And there are so many oddities in this case that it's definitely a doozy and needs a critical and logical examination. As always, if you enjoy the Mindshock podcast, find it interesting and informative, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, a like and share, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So let's do a brief rundown. I mean, I don't know how many people haven't heard of this case by now. I mean, at least in passing. This is, again, it was just such a famous case, but I'll do the quick rundown from the wiki and then we will get into the details. John David Gosch, born November 12, 1969, disappeared September 5th, 1982, was a paperboy in West Des Moines, Iowa, who disappeared without a trace between 6 and 7 a.m. on September 5th, 1982. He is presumed to have been kidnapped. As of 2022, there have been no arrests made, and the case is now considered cold, but remains open. His mother, Noreen Gosch, said that Johnny escaped from his captors and visited her with an unidentified man in 1997. She said that her son told her that he had been the victim of a pedophile organization and had been cast aside when he was too old, but subsequently feared for his life and lived under an assumed identity, feeling it was not safe to return home. Gosch's father, John, divorced from Noreen since '93, has publicly stated that he is not sure whether or not such a visit actually occurred. Many have also speculated the visit did occur, but it was someone else pretending to be Johnny. Authorities have not located Gosch or confirmed Noreen Gosch's account, and his fate continues to be the subject of speculation, conspiracy theories, and dispute. The case received huge publicity in 2006 when his mother said she had found photographs on her doorstep depicting Gosch in captivity. Some of the photos received were said to be children from a case in Florida, but one boy in the photos was never identified. Noreen Gosch insists that boy is Johnny. Gosch's picture was among the first to be featured on milk cartons as part of a campaign to find missing children. I mean, there's a lot here, obviously. I mean, there's several layers here, and not to fall for false dichotomies, is it possible the pictures are real, but the visit was either not him or never occurred? I mean, I'm going to get into the specifics of that visit, because that's something that I've actually thought about. I mean, it's kind of hard to make heads or tails of that visit because of all the different possibilities, but if it really was him, why did he feel safe to come visit that time? And why, I mean, there's just, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, regardless of which theory you believe, I mean, it's like you can't make a theory that would adequately explain all of the bullet points here. Disappearance, Sunday, September 5th, 82, in the suburb of West Des Moines. Johnny Gosch left home before dawn to begin his paper route. Although it was customary for Johnny to awaken his father to help with the route, the boy took only the family's miniature dachshund, Gretchen, with him that morning. Other paper carriers for the Des Moines Register would later report having seen Gosch at the paper drop picking up his newspapers. It was the last sighting of Gosch that can be corroborated by multiple witnesses. Another paperboy named Mike reported that he observed Gosch talking to a stocky man in a blue two-tone car near the paper drop. Another witness, John Rossi, saw the man in the blue car talking to Gosch and thought something was strange. Gosch told Rossi that the man was asking for directions and asked Rossi to help. Rossi looked at the license plate but could not recall the plate number. He said, "I keep hoping I'll wake up in the middle of the night and see that number on the license plate as distinctly as night and day, but that hasn't happened." Rossi underwent hypnosis and told police some of the numbers and that the plate was from Warren County, Iowa. As Gosch walked a block north where his route started, Mike noticed another man following Gosch. A neighbor heard a door slam and saw a silver Ford Fairmont speed away northwards from where Johnny's wagon was found. So, okay, does that mean there are at least two individuals involved here? John and Noreen Gosch, Johnny's parents, began receiving phone calls from customers along their son's route complaining of undelivered papers. John performed a cursory search of the neighborhood around 6 a.m. He immediately found Johnny's wagon full of newspapers, 2 blocks from their home. The Gosches immediately contacted the West Des Moines Police Department and reported Johnny's disappearance. Noreen, in her public statements and her book, Why Johnny Can't Come Home, has been critical of what she perceives as a slow reaction time from authorities and of the policy at the time that Gosch could not be classified as a missing person until 72 hours had passed. By her estimation, the police did not arrive to take a report for a full 45 minutes. Initially, the police came to believe that Gosch was a runaway, but later they changed their statement and suggested that Gosch was kidnapped, but they were unable to establish a viable motive. They turned up little evidence and arrested no suspects in connection with the case. Also, obviously, I know police, the go-to is runaway for teenagers. But this kid was 12 years old. I mean, he's kind of on the young side to... I mean, what are the stats for the most runaways? I mean, I don't think most runaways were that young. Generally, they'd be more into the teen years. But it's just weird how that seems to be like a go-to in almost in a lot of these missing cases. I mean, yeah, maybe they're a runaway, but what's the harm in doing an investigation? I mean, if they're that tied up with all these other definitive cases, maybe, but a few months after his September 82 disappearance, Noreen Gosch has said her son was spotted in Oklahoma when a boy yelled to a woman for help before being dragged off by 2 men. Wow. I mean, the amount of coincidences in this case is also quite substantial. I mean, we'll get them one at a time here, but let me finish the rundown before we start examining all of these points. Over the years, several private investigators have assisted the Gosches with the search for their son. Among them are Jim Rothstein, a retired New York City police detective, and Ted Gunderson, a retired chief of the Los Angeles FBI branch. And Ted Gunderson, of course, is one of the first guys to blow the whistle on so-called widespread human trafficking and satanic connections within political and law enforcement circles. What coincidence theorists pretend doesn't exist, this former FBI head exposed all of this. So, continuing on here, in 1984, Gosch's photograph appeared alongside that of Juanita Lee Estevez on milk cartons across America. They were the second and third abducted children to have their plights publicized this way. The first was Eaton Potts. Another missing paperboy. On August 12th, 1984, Eugene Martin, another Des Moines area paperboy, disappeared under similar circumstances. He disappeared while delivering newspapers on the south side of Des Moines. Authorities were unable to prove a connection between the three cases, yet Noreen Gosch says that she was personally informed of the abduction a few months in advance by a PI who was searching for her son. She was told that kidnapping would take place the second weekend in August 84, and it would be a paperboy from the south side of Des Moines. See, this is why people have doubts regarding Noreen, and yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Fraud by wire case. In 1985, Noreen Gosch received a letter from Robert Herman Meyer II, 19 years old, of Saginaw, Michigan. The letter had been signed Samuel Forbes Dakota, whereupon Meyer, acting as Dakota, stated that he was a guard in a motorcycle club when Gosch's son disappeared in September 82. According to Meyer, Gosch's son was taken as part of a large child slavery ring operated by the club. According to the FBI, Meyer requested from and received $11,000 from the Gosches. Meyer additionally requested $100,000 more, along with a promise to return their son. Meyer was arrested in Buffalo at the Canadian border by FBI agents and was later charged by fraud by wire. The letter Meyer wrote had stated that Gosch's son was sold to a man whom Meyer identified as a high-level drug dealer residing in Mexico City. Despite the accusation of fraud, Noreen Gosch reportedly believed Meyer at his word, and later criticized the FBI, stating that the arrest warrant against Meyer destroyed her and her husband John's credibility with anyone who would take the couple's offer to pay ransom for their boy. And there are a lot of links here to Mexico, so we will be getting to them. But it is curious that this is the guy that was pinned for this, because or fingered for this by Meyer. Because it's not like there's a shortage of so-called elite politicians or upper crime circles within the U.S. or in other countries. It's not like Mexico is the only place where this is happening. So it is a little bit curious that he pointed in Mexico, and then there's a bunch of coincidences that are going to happen regarding Mexico, which we'll get to. Noreen Gosch's account. According to Noreen Gosch's account, she was awakened 2:30 a.m. one morning in March 1997. So wait a second. She doesn't have a date here. That's a little bit problematic. Waiting outside was Johnny Gosch. So 1997, knocking on our apartment door. Waiting outside was Johnny Gosch, now 27, accompanied by an unidentified man. Gosch said she immediately recognized her son, who opened his shirt to reveal a birthmark on his chest. We talked about an hour or an hour and a half. He was with another man, but I have no idea who the person was. Johnny would look over to the other person for approval to speak, says Gosch. He didn't say where he is living or where he was going. In a 2005 interview, Noreen Gosch said that the night that he came here, he was wearing jeans and a shirt and had a coat on because it was March. It was cold and his hair was long. It was shoulder length and it was straight and dyed black. After the visit, she had the FBI create a picture she says looked like Johnny. Noreen Gosch self-published a book in 2000 titled Why Johnny Can't Come Home. The book represents her understanding of what her son went through based on the original research of various PIs and her son's visit. On September 1st, 2006, Gosch reported that she found photographs left at her front door, some of which she posted on her website. One color photo shows 3 boys bound and gagged. She says that a black and white photo appears to show a 12-year-old Johnny Gosch with his mouth gagged, his hands and feet tied, and an apparent human brand on his shoulder. A third photo shows a man possibly dead who may have had something tied around his neck. Mrs. Gosch stated that the man was one of the perpetrators who molested my son. Gosch later said that the first two photos had originated on a website featuring pornography involving minors. On September 13th, an anonymous letter was mailed to Des Moines police. Gentlemen, someone has played a reprehensible joke on a grieving mother. The photo in question is not one of her son, but of three boys in Tampa, Florida, about 1979 to 1980, challenging each other to an escape contest. There was an investigation concerning that picture made by the Hillsborough County, Florida Sheriff's Office. No charges were filed, and no wrongdoing was established. The lead detective on this case was named Zalva. This allegation should be easy enough to check out. Nelson Zalva, who worked for the Hillsborough County, Florida Sheriff's Office in the 70s, said the details of the letter were true, and adds that he also investigated the black and white in 1978 or 1979 before Gosch's disappearance. I interviewed the kids, and they said there was no coercion or touching. I could never prove a crime, Zalva said. When asked for proof that this was indeed the same photo from the investigation nearly 3 decades prior, Zalva could not provide any. Wait, why would you not be able to provide proof? There's no case files or anything? That's weird. According to the documentary film Who Took Johnny, 2014, only 3 boys in the picture were identified by law enforcement, but not the one thought to be Johnny. Noreen Gosch still believes the pictures to be of her son. Also, I'm just going to add another point here. Has anyone else verified this one detective's investigation? I'm just saying, if there's some high-ranking people involved, and how easy would it be to just tell an officer, yeah, just say you talked to the boys and that there was no coercion, or whatever. I mean, can anybody actually verify this? I mean, when you only have one guy's word to take for it, I mean, that's problematic. I don't understand how so-called true crime aficionados can just write something off based on one human's words. I mean, again, I bring this up all the time. It's not rocket science. Humans are fallible, and humans are also known to lie. I mean, this should not be that shocking at this point in time. I mean, maybe 100 years ago, in more proper society, it might be a little bit more shocking that someone in official capacity would lie, but not really today. Should be understood by now. Noreen Gosch still believes the pictures to be of her son. In 1989, 21-year-old Paul A. Bonacci told his attorney, John DeCamp, that he had been abducted into a sex ring with Gosch as a teenager and was forced to participate in Gosch's kidnapping. John DeCamp met with Bonacci and believed he was telling the truth. Noreen later met him and said he told her things he could only know from talking with her son. He said that Johnny had a birthmark on his chest, a scar on his tongue, and a burn scar on his lower leg. Although a description of the birthmark had been widely circulated, information about the scars had not been made public. See, and that's good, because now this seems legitimate then, right? Because if you hold back certain things, you can tell who's telling the truth or not later, because that's kind of a random thing. How many people have scars on their tongue? I mean, that seems rare. A burn scar on the lower leg, I mean, if you know which leg, and if you can, state exactly the size and shape, then yes, that would be, but I mean, obviously it's a little bit more common than scars on the tongue. Bonacci also described a stammer that Johnny had when he was upset. The FBI and local police do not believe that Bonacci is a credible witness in the case and have not interviewed him. Wow, is that the most mind-shocking? I mean, shouldn't police approach all leads like they just assumed he was not credible? So they didn't even bother to interview him instead of interviewing him to determine credibility? What does everybody make of this? I mean, is this one of the most botched investigations ever? And the FBI are involved here too, so it's kind of weird. His siblings told police he was at home when Gosch was abducted. That's curious. So, I mean, here's the thing though. When you have these traumatized individuals, they could possibly misremember details, right? Like, what does he mean by he assisted with the kidnapping? Did he mean right in that minute? Or did he mean later on? Because this is also a relative kid here. So he would have been a teenager at the time. And also, how would his siblings be able to tell the police he was at home? Like, how old were his siblings? And they were keeping their eyes on the minute clock? Wait, what? Like, they kept tabs on him every single minute, every second of every day, and they specifically knew the day that Gosch was abducted, exactly where he was at which second. I mean, that's kind of weird, too. Does nobody find that weird? I mean, they could have told police that, but how would I mean, they're just going to take their word, too? Maybe they really believed it, too. Like, they thought he was up in his room or whatever, but if he wasn't, how would they know? Unless they had eyes on him every second of that day, and how would they even remember that perfectly? But anyway, I mean, if they had eyes on him every single day for like that whole week, I mean, then yes, then they would be able to tell that. But if they didn't, I mean, that's weird. That's weird. I mean, we'll get into. I mean, this case, it's not like we have nothing to go on here. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces here. There's a lot of testimonies, and it seems like these could be credible. I mean, obviously, there's a whole bunch of others that might not be credible, but these are the main ones outlined here on the wiki, and they seem like theoretically, it's plausible that all of this could be true. National interest. The case generated national interest as Noreen Gosch became increasingly vocal about the inadequacy of law enforcement's investigation of missing children's cases. She established the Johnny Gosch Foundation in '82, through which she visited schools and spoke at seminars about modus operandi of sexual predators. She lobbied for the Johnny Gosch Bill, state legislation which would mandate an immediate police response to reports of missing children. The bill became law in Iowa in '84, and similar or identical laws were later passed in Missouri and 7 other states. In August '84, Noreen Gosch testified in Senate hearings on organized crime, speaking about organized pedophilia and its presumed role in her son's abduction. She began receiving death threats. Gosch also testified before the U.S. Department of Justice, which provided $10 million to establish the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Gosch was invited to the White House by President Ronald Reagan for the dedication ceremony. Wow. I mean, so she testifies in Senate hearings, and then she gets death threats. Now, see, that's curious, because if the random crazies, they would be giving her death threats at random times. But now, I mean, she's talking about organized crime and this kind of organized trafficking of sorts, which might involve political circles. Now she's getting death threats. That's weird. That's definitely weird. So that's the basic rundown. I mean, there is a lot to work with here. Now, before we get to the Reddit discussion and more exact points, I do want to read this article from the LA Times. April 5th, 1990. Body is found, lost paperboy case reopened. The mother of Johnny Gosch, the West Des Moines paperboy who disappeared 7 years ago, said Wednesday she was stunned by the discovery of the body of a young man with a similar name. West Des Moines police thought they had a break in Gosch's baffling disappearance when Mexican authorities on Friday pulled the body of a young man from a drainage ditch in northern Mexico and identified him as John E. Gosch. The name was similar to John D. Gosch, who vanished on September 5th, 1982 while delivering Sunday papers in Des Moines. But West Des Moines Police Lieutenant Gary Scott said in Tacoma, Washington, family named Gosch maintains the body is that of their adopted son. Police in Yuma, Arizona said that John E. Gosch apparently was killed near their city in a drug-related shooting, and the body ended up in Mexico. Yuma authorities said they will send dental records to West Des Moines for comparisons to the missing paperboy. I feel terrible, said Noreen Gosch, the paperboy's mother. This whole coincidence is just unbelievable. It would be such a relief to have it over. I'd rather have the bad news over now instead of later. The coincidences do not stop at the names of the victims. The man found in Mexico was born on October 22nd, 1969, 2 weeks before the missing paperboy's birthday. The Gosch family in Washington told West Des Moines police they adopted a boy in Oklahoma in 1980 and renamed him John. So who's ready for a mind shock now? Noreen Gosch said her son was spotted in Oklahoma a few months after he disappeared. A boy reportedly begged a woman for help before being dragged off by 2 men. The woman called police, but they could not locate the youth. Okay, so let's recap the coincidence stack thus far. There was a sighting in Oklahoma a few months of Johnny Gosch. Now, a body turns up in Mexico of a kid who was adopted, his birthday within weeks of John D. Gosch. So this John Gosch, the family in Washington, said that they adopted him in Oklahoma. But they said they adopted him in 1980, though. That would have been before the disappearance. I'm assuming this can all be verified. And then also we have that motorcycle gang member who said that John Gosch was sold to some guy in Mexico. Then this other John Gosch shows up dead in Mexico. Is everybody following thus far? Because we're not even done with the Mexico coincidences. Continuing the article here, in another coincidence, Des Moines police traveled to southern Mexico last week to check out a reported sighting of Eugene Martin, who disappeared from his Des Moines paper route 2 years after John D. Gosch vanished. So let me get this straight. There's also another sighting in Mexico of another Des Moines area paperboy who vanished. I mean, Des Moines is not the only city in the United States. I mean, is it weird? Does anybody else find it weird? The Mexico connections. I mean, this is really making your head spin. Now, John is obviously a very popular first name, so, but Gosch is not really that popular of a last name. I actually cannot recall any other Gosch that I've seen other than the one in this case. So there's another Gosch family. Apparently, they're not related to Noreen Gosch. And so they happen to adopt a boy. Now, when you're dealing with statistics, I mean, this is problematic. So there's 50 states. So out of all the possible states, they adopted this John Gosch in Oklahoma, a state where Johnny was supposedly spotted. Now, the problem is here, of course, is the year, because they claim that this John Gosch was adopted in 1980. So I'm assuming this all can be verified. Now, obviously, paperwork can be messed up, but are there photographs of this adoption? I mean, that's kind of a big deal when you adopt someone. You would think they would have photographs with this guy, with this kid, and if they have photographs, 1980, 1981, all before John D. Gosch's disappearance, then okay. I mean, it's still kind of a weird coincidence, but whatever. You could, if it was thoroughly investigated, but it seems a lot of things in this case were not thoroughly investigated. Because unless you can verify that adoption, I mean, I'm assuming this was verified, dental records, etc., and that it wasn't him. But that's just an assumption on my part. I mean, is there verification of that? Alright, let's get to all of the heavy details now. So we're going to be taking a look at the CavDef write-up on the Johnny Gosch case. So this is the Coalition Against Voter Disenfranchisement and Election Fraud. Wow. So, for whatever reason, they have a write-up on the Johnny Gosch case. So, let's get to it. I mean, this is going to be very comprehensive and exhaustive. So make sure you have some drinks and snacks handy, because this is gonna get into the nitty-gritty in typical Mindshock fashion here. Now that we have the groundwork laid down we can examine each of the wrinkles in this case and see how much more information there is and what can be derived from it. On the morning of September 5th, 1982, West Des Moines paperboy Johnny Gosch was abducted while on his paper route. With the police and FBI being unhelpful, Johnny's mother, Noreen Gosch, took matters into her own hands, hiring private investigators to pursue the case. Over the next decade, hundreds of leads poured in, as did a couple credible sightings of Johnny indicating that he was still alive. Then, in 1990, the Gosch family got their first major break when the Franklin child sex ring victim, Paul Bonacci, came forward to reveal that he was forced to help kidnap Johnny Gosch. His testimony revealed a sinister, well-protected pedophile underground responsible for victimizing Johnny along with hundreds, if not thousands, of other children. Bonacci knew so much unreleased information about the Gosch case that both Noreen and her then-husband came to believe Bonacci. But the police dismissed him as a liar, never even interviewing him. Though evidence has continued to accumulate supporting Bonacci's disclosures about a high-level pedophile ring, the Johnny Gosch case remains unsolved. So was there some kind of stand-down order or something where they knew Bonacci was legit, so they have to pretend he's crazy or insane or not legit because he just knows too much about this ring and possibly upper levels of political involvement or law enforcement involvement in the ring? Not necessarily specifically with Johnny Gosch, but in the ring, so they don't want him getting any kind of publicity or being made credible in any way. Is that what happened regarding Bonacci? So they also have a very extensive write-up here on the Franklin scandal, but I am just going to read their quick write-up here. The Franklin child sex ring was a politically connected child prostitution ring in Omaha, Nebraska during the 80s. Children from all over Omaha, including the Boys Town Orphanage and Nebraska foster care system, were kidnapped to be abused at sex parties. Republican power broker Lawrence E. King operated the ring and hosted these sex parties, which were attended by political and business elites in Omaha. He also flew these children around the country, particularly Washington, D.C., to be abused by other rich and powerful men. The main purpose of King's pedophile ring was blackmailing politicians, government officials, businessmen, and media figures with proof of them having sexually abused children. King carried out this blackmail operation on behalf of the CIA in partnership with Republican lobbyist and CIA asset Craig J. Spence, whose D.C. home he would often fly children to. So what do all the coincidence theorists make of those claims? I mean, it's kind of crazy. The problem is, too, like a lot of these courts, if these federal officials and court officials are involved in the scandal, obviously they're not going to investigate themselves, so they're just going to say that it's, that these allegations are all unfounded. But, I mean, it's shocking, though. I mean, it's really shocking if even a small percentage of it is true. So here let's go back to the Johnny Gosch right up here, the timeline, suspicious activity. Photos taken of Johnny by a woman with California plates. So this is sourced from America's Most Wanted. I'm actually gonna go through the entire write-up on America's Most Wanted here. This is their write-up. The mysterious case of Johnny Gosch. More than any other missing child case in U.S. history, the disappearance of 12-year-old Johnny Gosch has spawned a multitude of conspiracy theories that follow the elusive trail of tantalizing clues from a middle-class community in Iowa to an underground pedophile ring in Nebraska to the power brokers of Washington, D.C. Now, 24 years after Johnny's disappearance, it appears a new chapter to this puzzling mystery is beginning to unfold. The disappearance. On Sunday, September 6th, 1982, in the bedroom community of West Des Moines, Iowa, 12-year-old Johnny Gosch is headed out on his newspaper route. He brings with him the family dog and his red wagon to carry the papers. This is the last time Johnny is ever seen again. Johnny's parents, Noreen and John Gosch, launched the initial search for their son because the West Des Moines police were short-staffed due to the Labor Day weekend. And we actually didn't even touch upon that. Labor Day weekend, I mean, there's a lot of travel going on at that time. Noreen knew in her heart that her son had not run away from home, as the police suspected, but had been abducted by a stranger. Because both the Gosches were asleep when Johnny left the house that morning, there is conflicting information on what he was wearing that day. Their best guess was either dark sweatpants or a white t-shirt with blue jean cutoffs. Another newspaper boy named Mike tells the police that a stocky man in a 79 or 80 blue two-tone two-door Ford Fairmont with Iowa plates had been driving around that morning asking the newspaper boys for directions. Wow, so this guy was asking multiple boys. Johnny told Mike that the man made him feel uncomfortable when he asked him for directions. So are these kids picking up a certain vibe here? As the boys noticed the Fairmont circling the area again, Johnny said he was heading home. Mike watched Johnny walking... Wait, why is he heading home? Mike watched Johnny walking down the street and noticed another man he hadn't seen before, walking closely behind Johnny as he turned the corner. Another point here, if these guys are not working together, is this really just some guy Labor Day weekend? He really is lost. And maybe he's a creepy guy, whatever, but he didn't abduct anybody. He's a red herring. And this other guy who was following him, he's the real perpetrator. Or vice versa. Or they're working together. Or neither's involved. Let's keep all the variables on the table here. A police artist creates a composite sketch of the stocky, dark-complected man driving the car. Witnesses describe him in his 30s with a mustache. The sketch is released to the media, but nothing solid comes from the lead. Days turn into weeks, and weeks bleed into months. Noreen becomes obsessed with finding her son. Every night she leaves her porch light on. She does numerous television interviews hoping that Johnny will see her and know that help is on the way. Sightings. Usually when a child is abducted, he's not seen or heard from again. But in the years following Johnny's disappearance, there were sightings, evidence, and bizarre coincidences. And to this very day, many believe Johnny was the victim of a bizarre and insidious plot and is still alive and in hiding. On August 12, 1984, 2 years after Johnny disappeared, 12-year-old Eugene Martin, another paperboy for the Des Moines Register, disappears while on his newspaper route. The FBI jumps on the case immediately, but like Johnny, it's as though Eugene has disappeared without a trace. On August 16th, President Reagan phones the editor of the Des Moines Register, James Gannon, and asks what, if anything, he can do to help in the disappearance of the two boys. To date, authorities have been unable to positively link these two cases. For the next 2 years, there are sightings of Johnny all over the U.S., including a dollar bill which shows up in Sioux City, Iowa. Written on the front of the currency is, quote, "I am alive, dash Johnny Gosch," end quote. Then, on Valentine's Day, 1988, a typed letter arrives at the Gosch home. It's postmarked Idaho. The writer says he's Johnny, and he's been kidnapped and forced to do terrible things. He says his kidnappers have dyed his hair and given him a new name. He types at the end of the letter, "Your son, Johnny Gosch." The note also mentions the incident in Oklahoma where Johnny approached a woman for help. According to Noreen, that tip was never made public, which validates for her that the letter is authentic. Okay, wow. See, this case has so many of these little wrinkles where those details were not made public, so how would someone know that? But why is Johnny typing? Why would he not write the letter in his handwriting? But, okay, unless, I mean, there are some really dark theories, but if there are some MK Ultra connections here, and they're just really messing with the mother, and it's just some psychotics who know what happened, they know about the ring, so they can throw in details like that because they have connections in law enforcement, if it's not really Johnny. But I mean, that's rough. Johnny Gosch was painted in red nail polish on the bathroom wall of a restaurant in Denver, Colorado. Denver Airport, of course, a staple of Illuminati conspiracy lore. Continuing on here, a conspiracy theory is born. In 1989, 21-year-old Paul Bonacci, a convicted child molester, surfaces with a tale that is still spinning conspiracy theories today. While serving time in an Omaha, Nebraska prison for molesting a young boy, Bonacci admitted to his psychiatrist he helped abduct Iowa newspaper boy Johnny Gosch. He claimed that there was an organized ring of pedophiles in Omaha that abducts children and forces them into a life of pornography and prostitution, and in some cases auctions off these children to clients for sex. Bonacci, who suffers from a multiple personality disorder, had been a key witness in Omaha's Franklin Federal Credit Union bank scandal. He testified that Larry E. King, who was charged and convicted with embezzling $40 million from the bank, had wild sex parties at home, and Bonacci himself had sex with several prominent Omaha citizens who were there. Larry E. King was a major Republican fundraiser based in Omaha and sang the national anthem at both the 84 and 88 Republican conventions. Bonacci claimed that he and others were taken to the Republican convention in Dallas and also made numerous trips to King's Washington, D.C. apartment on Embassy Row, where they were offered up for sex for pay with prominent Republican politicians. Bonacci claims that the organized ring picked him up at the age of 8 and forced him into prostitution. He says he was photographed, blackmailed, and later forced to be a decoy to lure other young boys like Johnny into waiting vehicles. Bonacci admits that he became a molester himself. Bonacci's attorney, John DeCamp, phoned the Gosches with this story, and the Gosches' private investigator, Roy Stevens, spent 2 years trying to disprove Bonacci's claims. Because Bonacci had been charged with perjury and perpetrating a hoax by the grand jury in the Franklin credit scandal, neither the FBI nor the West Des Moines police would even interview him about the Gosch case. They still feel he is an unreliable witness. But here's the thing: if he is telling the truth, wouldn't they want to charge him with perjury and perpetrating a hoax? What would they do to discredit him if his story is true? Would they really just allow him to just say all that, especially if there are court officials and these high-ranking DC officials involved? In the 2 years Roy Stevens investigated Bonacci, he went from skeptic to supporter. And some of Bonacci's story and the evidence Roy Stevens uncovered is compelling. Also, someone who's that severely traumatized, developing a multiple personality disorder, I mean, that's a way of the brain to protect itself from a lot of the trauma. I mean, that's quite common, is it not, for people that have this level of trauma? Okay, so here's his claims. Emilio is the ringleader of the organization who orders the abductions and sells the children to pedophiles. Bonacci claims Emilio was the man in the Ford Fairmont asking Johnny for directions. See, an issue I have here, unless this ring is just starting up, why would the ringleader himself put himself in that position where he could be spotted? I mean, that's an issue, unless this is like the early years of the ring where there's not a lot of employees. If it's just like 2 or 3 guys, then okay. But if this is some top boss, it's hard to believe that he would be out and about. Okay, continuing on here, Tony is used as the driver. Remarkably, he's been identified in other child abductions across the country, including Mikola Joy Garrett, who disappeared in November 1988 from her home in Hayward, California. The night before Johnny's abduction, Bonacci saw a man bring photos of young boys to Emilio. He says one was Johnny Gosch. Noreen Gosch remembered that a neighbor noticed a woman taking pictures of Johnny 3 months before his abduction. Even more interesting, where the neighbor saw the picture being taken matches the background described by Bonacci in the photo he saw. Okay, hold on a second. It's time. I mean, even the most skeptical, if that is true, wow. I mean, that's damning. It's not like we don't just have some vague statements here like in all these other cases where you can't make anything of it. I mean, if he's giving this level of specificity, I mean, You gotta take this guy serious. I mean, not that he's telling the truth, but at least the possibility that he is with this level of specificity. I mean, this is crazy. Also, how creepy is that? I mean, this case is creepy enough by itself, but there's a woman involved in the ring. She's taking photos of these preteen boys in their neighborhood, in their around their house. I mean, this is creepy stuff. They're stalking this kid for like 3 months, and how many other kids are they stalking? So I mean, this is just so dark. I mean, this is really one of the darkest cases ever, just because from all the information, it's not an isolated incident. I mean, it's really bizarre. Continuing on here, Mike was a boy who Bonacci claims was with him in the back seat of the car that Emilio was driving on the day of the abduction. He said another man pushed Johnny into the car, and Paul used chloroform to knock Johnny out. Bonacci said they were taken to a farmhouse in Sioux City, Iowa, where he was the first to sexually abuse Johnny, and then photos were taken. Emilio entered the room and told Bonacci and Mike to undress Johnny. Emilio had a buyer who wanted to see photos of the boys doing things to each other. Eventually, the buyer arrived, looked at the pictures, paid $35,000, and took Johnny to Colorado. Charlie ran the farm in Sioux City, Bonacci says. Roy Stevens actually located a Chuck he believes is Charlie, and found people who said things about Chuck that were similar to what Bonacci said about Charlie. Wow, this Roy Stevens is a fearless PI. I mean, wow. The Colonel was the man who Bonacci said ran a ranch in Colorado. Bonacci said the last time he saw Johnny was back in 1986 at that same ranch. Johnny, whose hair was now dyed black and was renamed Mark, had attempted to run away. When they caught up with him, they branded Johnny on his right buttock like a piece of livestock. John DeCamp, legal counsel to the chairman of the State Senate committee that investigated the Federal Credit Union and who later became a state senator, wrote a book on the scandal called The Franklin Cover-Up. At first, he too was skeptical of Bonacci's claims, but now he believes that high-level government officials wanted to keep everything quiet and did everything they could to discredit Paul Bonacci. He wonders why the FBI completely refused to investigate Bonacci's claims regarding Johnny Gosch. It was a forbidden zone. They wouldn't even talk about it, says DeCamp. I mean, that is so damning as well, because it's like an order was given from above. Like, it's weird. DeCamp says Bonacci's multiple personalities, at last count 28, is a result of years of sexual abuse. It's caused by the very things he describes. In 1990, investigator Gary Corroborating, who was investigating Paul Bonacci's claims for the Nebraska state legislation, urgently phoned State Senator Loren Schmidt from Chicago saying he had found the smoking gun. Corroborating told Schmidt he would fly that night from Chicago on his private plane with his son back to Lincoln, Nebraska. The plane exploded over Aurora, Illinois, killing Corroborating and his 8-year-old son. According to an eyewitness, just before hearing the explosion, he saw a flash of light. Corroborating's briefcase and the rear seat of the plane never were recovered. Okay, how far down the rabbit hole? I mean, this is right in America's Most Wanted as well. We're not talking about some obscure GeoCities blog here. This is all relatively official information here. So, Gary Corroborating phoned State Senator Loren Schmidt. So obviously all their phones must have been tapped, or if Schmidt is involved, then he did the tip-off. But this is just crazy. So he says he has a smoking gun, then he's dead, and all the evidence is gone. Wow. Okay, continuing on here. October 1991, Noreen Gosch met Paul Bonacci in a face-to-face meeting. She said Paul described to her things about Johnny that she had never released to the press. That Johnny had a stutter and that he had taken yoga. And yoga in 1982 is not the same thing as yoga today. I mean, that, I don't know how many 12-year-old boys took yoga in 1982. I mean, that's an interesting detail. Because of those small details, she believes Paul Bonacci's story is true. In a bizarre coincidence, that summer, a friend of the Gosches was in a Denver restaurant and noticed painted on the bathroom wall in bright red nail polish, Johnny Gosch was here. Was this a Mexican restaurant? Roy Stevens showed a series of photos, including the Mexican restaurant, to Bonacci. Without prompting, Bonacci identified the restaurant and recalled how he, Johnny, and Mike went to the bathroom, and Johnny painted Johnny Gosch was here on the wall. Bonacci even produced a letter from his friend Mike mentioning how Johnny Gosch wrote on the bathroom walls in a Mexican restaurant in red nail polish. Wow. So this would have been my pick for unrelated, but again, keep in mind, there's no widespread internet. So, I mean, this is problematic. This is problematic. Yeah, this is rough. This is really rough. I mean, this case, that yeah, I mean, this is going to be one of the most bizarre cases ever. Just all the details here. So Bonacci had a letter from his friend Mike specifically mentioning that Johnny wrote this in red nail polish. It is kind of weird. Like, what else? I mean, does the letter just mention random things, and that's one of them? So I guess if you write a letter every month or whatever, or every week, every couple days, you're gonna mention things that happen. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of weird. But again, like I said, in late 80s, early 90s, the internet is not so widespread that there's like all these trolls coming out of the woodwork to be writing that. Like in this day and age, if there's a popular missing persons case, people might write that in bathrooms or whatever, just I don't know, just cuz. Back then it seems like it'd be a little bit more rare, but that was still my out of all of these things, that was my pick to be unrelated, but now I don't know. And how bizarre is it, a friend of the Goshes? So somebody from Des Moines just happened to be at this Denver restaurant? I don't know. That's weird. I mean, if it wasn't a friend of the family, I mean, that would be that would be slightly less weird. That would be less weird, a lot less weird actually. But continuing on here, in 1992, America's Most Wanted aired the Johnny Gosch story, and with the help of Paul Bonacci, several composite sketches were drawn of the principals involved in the alleged pedophilia ring. After the show aired, Noreen Gosch received a 14-page letter from a boy named Jimmy, who said the same men who abducted her son had abducted him, and he told her that Johnny was still alive. Noreen said he knew personal details about her son that had never before been released, and that she believes him. America's Most Wanted aired a series of interviews with Jimmy in March 1993, in which Jimmy talked about his friendship with Johnny. He said they had made a blood oath to protect and help each other and to trust each other always. Jimmy said he was with Johnny at the ranch in Colorado. So we have multiple people here. This is not just one crazy person. There's another guy here corroborating Bonacci. So, and this guy was with Johnny at the ranch in Colorado for 4 years, and that when Jimmy was overheard talking about escaping, he too was branded. Jimmy lifted his pant leg and revealed a large brand on his leg similar to the brand Paul Bonacci had seen on Johnny. Jimmy later met with Noreen and John Gosch and gave them a diary he had kept of his life. Included in it were some of Johnny's memories of the time when he was a paper boy. Jimmy wrote that Johnny had 37 customers and how proud he felt when he won the local paperboy competition and won a free airline ticket. Noreen says all of that is true. 37 customers, that's a specific point there. Wait, so how did Jimmy escape? America's Most Wanted producers took Paul Bonacci to Colorado in an attempt to find the Colonel's ranch where these boys say they were held. Outside of Buena Vista, Bonacci recognized the piece of property. He physically reacted when he walked up to the front door and began to cry uncontrollably. Paul showed America's Most Wanted the secret underground chamber where he says the children were put in case authorities came by. Paul says some of the boys were placed there blindfolded as a form of punishment. Is Johnny Gosch alive? In 97, Noreen Gosch says Johnny himself paid her a visit. He stayed for an hour and told her what happened and why he could never come home or see her again because of the criminal activity he's now involved in. That sparked a book penned by Noreen called Why Johnny Can't Come Home. But the latest twist is the most bizarre. On August 27th, 2006, 2 photos were left at the home of Noreen Gosch. In one photo, a young boy is tied and gagged and a brand mark is seen on his upper arm, which surprisingly appears identical to the brand mark on Jimmy's ankle that America's Most Wanted videotaped in 1993. It is also identical to the one Paul Bonacci described to America's Most Wanted in 1992 that he claimed to have seen on Johnny Gosch's rear end in the late 80s. The other photo shows 3 boys lying side by side in a bed, also bound and gagged. Noreen Gosch was certain her son Johnny is in 2 of the photos and quickly turned them over to the police for analysis. But just this week, the West Des Moines police say Johnny Gosch is not among the boys in the photos. Nelson Zalva, a retired detective from the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office in Tampa, recognized the photos as evidence in a case he investigated in 78 or 79, which predates Johnny Gosch's 82 disappearance. Zalva says all the boys in the photos were identified, but failed to provide authorities with enough evidence to prosecute the man who took the pictures. Hillsborough Sheriff's Department is now researching their files to locate the original photos because retired Detective Zalva does not recall seeing a brand mark on the boy in the photo. Also, how old is this guy? Is he having memory issues? Which raises the probability that this is in all likelihood another cruel hoax played on Noreen Gosch, a mother so desperate to have her son back. So let's go over this timeline again, just to get the record straight here. So September 6th, 82, the disappearance. March 83, sightings. A 12-year-old boy matching Johnny's description approached a woman leaving a store in Oklahoma. He says, "I'm John David Gosch, please help me." Before the woman could do anything, 2 men approached the boy and led him away. She later reported this to police in October 83 after seeing Johnny's photo during the NBC movie Adam. She immediately phoned authorities, and the FBI later confirmed that they believe it was Johnny Gosch. So the FBI has stated they believe that this sighting was Gosch in March 83. So he says, "I'm John David Gosch." She doesn't know who that is, but he's saying, "Please help me," in March, and she doesn't report it till October, till she sees a photo of the boy that was missing. So what was she thinking? I mean, yeah, it's crazy. That's crazy. April 19th, 1983. On the night of April 19th, 83, Noreen answers her telephone. It's a boy on the other end who says, please help me, I can't get away." "Are you okay?" Noreen asks. "Yes," says the caller. His speech was slurred. "Where are you?" she asked, but the caller hung up. Noreen was convinced it's Johnny on the phone, and she hangs on to the idea that he's still alive. Unfortunately, police were unable to trace the call, and the lead slipped through their fingers. The West Des Moines police don't believe the calls are legitimate, but Noreen insisted the caller was her son. Even her husband John began to worry. Is it true, or is it just a mother grasping at straws? Yeah, I don't see that. Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know what to make of that one, because I mean, so they verified that there was a call at that time. They were just unable to trace it based on the wording here. That's what it seems like. Yeah, that's tough. That's really tough. Now, how did Johnny Gosch usually speak? Because would he say, "Help me, Mom," or when she picked up, she didn't say hello, and he just rambled that out because he didn't know who picked up? And he said, please help me, I can't get away." If he was drugged, I mean, yeah, who knows how exactly he'd be talking. But continuing on in the timeline here, August 12th, 1984, another paperboy vanishes. 2 years after Johnny disappeared, 12-year-old Eugene Martin, another paperboy for the Des Moines Register, disappeared while on his newspaper route. So he's also 12 years old. 1985, so many leads, so little hope. In the mid-80s, sightings of Johnny were reported all over the U.S. His mother received letters supposedly from Johnny saying he was alive, still under kidnappers' control. Unfortunately, the case remained a mystery and no progress was made from these leads. I mean, how many missing persons cases of a young kid like this does the family receive hoax letters, supposedly from their missing child? I mean, how could he have gotten away to get the letter? I mean, yeah, it's tough. 89, a conspiracy is born. Paul Bonacci, convicted child molester, went public with a story he said he helped abduct Johnny Gosch back in 82. Bonacci claimed that he himself had been kidnapped by a man named Emilio and was forced into an organized ring of pedophiles. From there, he was prostituted and also helped lure young boys for the abduction. As Bonacci says, was the case was Johnny Gosch. 1990, smoking gun exploded. Investigator Gary Caradori, who was investigating Paul Bonacci's claims for the Nebraska state legislation, urgently phoned State Senator Lauren Schmidt from Chicago saying he had found the smoking gun. On his plane flight to show the case-cracking evidence, his plane exploded and everything was lost. October 91, Noreen Gosch meets Paul Bonacci. Face-to-face, emotional conversation. She says that Bonacci told her things about her son that nobody else would know. 1991, that summer, a message was written in red nail polish on a bathroom wall of a Denver restaurant. Johnny Gosch was here. 1992, Johnny's story airs on America's Most Wanted. Jimmy steps forward. America's Most Wanted aired the Johnny Gosch story, and with the help of Paul Bonacci, several composite sketches were drawn of the principals he says were involved. After the show aired, Noreen Gosch received a 14-page letter from a boy named Jimmy, who said the same men who had abducted her son had abducted him, and he told her that Johnny was still alive. Noreen said he knew personal details about her son that had never been released before, and she believes him. March 93. Jimmy gets interviewed. Jimmy stepped forward and was interviewed on America's Most Wanted. While he never showed his face, Jimmy gave a lot of solid evidence. He spoke of his friendship with Johnny, showed evidence of branding he tells was a punishment for the boys, and even got a diary he kept of it, and even gave a diary he kept of his horrible experience. So then basically nothing until 97. In 97, this is the visit, the Johnny Gosch visit to Noreen Gosch, stayed for an hour, described the criminal activity. August 2006. The latest piece of evidence in the Whirlwind case was the arrival of 2 photos left on Noreen Gosch's porch. The 2 photos show a series of boys bound and gagged. Noreen says that she recognizes one of these boys as her son. You know what's also curious is it just too convenient that Detective Zalva and this Tampa area sheriff's office, they cannot provide definitive proof that this was from that case. I mean, is that troubling? That's kind of troubling. It's like you can't rule that out. It's just weird. It's just weird and unnerving. So let's continue now here back to the cavdef.org write-up. So the suspicious activity in the timeline started with this woman with California plates taking photos of Johnny Gosch months before his disappearance. Okay, now the next point of suspicious activity, there were hang-up phone calls at the Gosch's home. So this is from Noreen Gosch's book, Why Johnny Can't Come Home, so page 2. Early on September 5th, 82, our phone rang. I looked at the clock and it was 1:30 a.m. My husband took the call saying, yes, all right, okay, then hung up. I asked him who it was and he replied it was a wrong number. I remember thinking it was very odd. We had been receiving calls like this every Sunday morning at the same time for the past 4 weeks. Never before had my husband spoken to anyone until this call, but he always said they were just hang-up calls. So some people, I might as well introduce this theory here. Some people think that Johnny Gosch's father might have been involved in some way. Now, this phone activity, I don't know what to make of that. Continuing our book here, page 75, following this business trip, we began to receive hang-up phone calls every night, usually about 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. John always answered the phone. It was located on his nightstand. Page 77, we received a phone call at 1:30 a.m. every Sunday morning from the beginning of August until September 5th, the morning Johnny was kidnapped. My husband John would pick up the phone and say, "You've got the wrong number," and hang up. On the morning of the kidnapping, September 5th, 1982, at 1:35 a.m., the phone rang. He answered. I woke up to hear him saying, all right, okay. Then he hung up. I questioned him about the call, and he kept insisting it was a wrong number. He seemed nervous at the time, but it was late, and I drifted back to sleep, not realizing the worst was about to happen. Okay, what does everybody make of that? Because, again, anything out of the ordinary, so these calls only happen on Sundays, which happened to be the day of the paper route and when he disappeared. I mean, yeah, the coincidence stack, I mean, I don't like it. I mean, this is really weird. What does everybody make of this? I mean, at first I was kind of thinking maybe it's not related, but it was only on Sundays, and then apparently up to he disappeared, so then they never happened again. I mean, that's kind of weird. Okay, another suspicious activity here. Weird encounter with a policeman at a football game on Friday. Okay, I mean, we're going into major Mindshock territory here. So this is an article by Tom Alex and Tom Suk, S-U-K, the Des Moines Register. The Gosches state, police not cooperating with us. Parents of John Gosch, the missing West Des Moines newspaper carrier, say that 2 days before their son disappeared, he spent some time talking to a police officer at Valley Stadium in West Des Moines. In fact, on the way home that night, young John Gosch said he might want to become a police officer when he grew up, the parents say. The Gosches say the man who talked to their son on September 3rd resembles a man talking to their son the morning he disappeared, but they say West Des Moines police have not cooperated in their efforts to identify the officer. What? The missing boy's parents, John and Noreen Gosch, said in a letter to the Des Moines Register, "We have been fighting, trying to get the police to get the names of the men that were on duty that night, and they said that they couldn't, that it wasn't that important." Well, it is important because this man bears a resemblance to the composite sketch of the last person John Gosch was seen talking to. West Des Moines Police Chief Orville Cooney said he did not know the Gosches had been having a problem getting to see photos of the men. There were a total of 10 officers working the game that night, said Cooney. They have seen all but 2 of them, and we are going to get Polaroids of those 2. Well, what's taking so long? He has time to do all these interviews, but he doesn't have time to get the Polaroid? What? Relations between the Gosches and the police have been strained at times during the investigation. The Gosches continued their criticism of the police in the letter, saying the police investigation of their son's disappearance September 5th, as he prepared to deliver his newspapers, leaves a lot to be desired. West Des Moines police still do not have a set of fingerprints of our son for identification purposes. What? This is November 9th, 1982 in the Des Moines Register. This is unbelievable. What? Says the letter, nor hair samples, etc. Our private detective did this immediately when he came on the case. Over half of our son's customers on the paper route were never interviewed. Our private detective did this immediately. Noreen Gosch added that the police have still not released the composite drawing of the man who was seen talking to young John the morning he disappeared. Cooney said police had gone through the boy's room, but he said he didn't know if fingerprints had been lifted. At this point, fingerprints are not important to the investigation, the chief said. He added that he did not know how many people have been interviewed by the investigators, but I do know they interviewed an awful lot of people up there. Police have differing sketches from 2 witnesses of the man last seen with the boy. He said police have not released the sketches because if it's inaccurate, I hate like heck to release it. So it's better to release nothing? I mean, if there's 2 sketches, it's either one or the other, possibly neither, possibly a mix of 2. But how does releasing nothing help the case? Asked how he responded to the criticism, Cooney said, I'd probably be saying and doing just what they are if I were them. I want to keep the pressure on too, but we're doing everything we can. Okay, so what do we make of this? So obviously a terrible response, but if one of the officers, I mean, this is kind of crazy. If one of the officers is one of the abductors, I mean, that could explain, if the police department is in on the conspiracy, I mean, that sure would explain why they're dragging their feet on the investigation and they're only showing, like, some of the officers that were present, but. Wow, okay. So, another issue here is the insistence by Johnny that he could go on the paper route by himself. So that's the other thing too. So this is the first time ever he goes by himself. People magazine has an article here, October 10th, 1988. An anguished mother refuses to give up hope for the son who vanished 6 years ago. And it states here that there were 2 men seen talking to Johnny before that. Okay. Not one. Also, it states the Gosches have 2 other children, a daughter and a son, and that they are dealing with crank calls, death threats, and exploitation by people trying to capitalize on their desperation. So, here's Noreen Gosch. Johnny was in junior high, wanted to have a paper route so he could start earning a little money of his own. During the week, he delivered the papers in the afternoon, but on Sunday mornings, he had to leave when it was still dark and the streets were empty. That concerned me, but my husband said he would go with Johnny, and that became the pattern. On this particular Sunday, however, that's not what happened. The night before, Johnny complained that he was the biggest kid picking up papers and he wanted to do the route by himself. We said no, but the next morning Johnny went off alone without waking his father. We were awakened by the phone at 7 a.m. as neighbors called to say they hadn't gotten their papers. A block and a half from the house is where Johnny's wagon full of papers was found, and then the dog had actually wandered home later. Okay, this is gonna get totally Mindshock land. So here's okay. So my husband called the police. I began phoning the other newsboys who picked up their papers at the same corner. They told me about a man who had pulled up in a car, supposedly to ask Johnny for directions. A short time later, the man came back. The other boys said Johnny thought there was something weird about this guy, and he told them, quote, "I don't like this. I'm taking my papers and going home," end quote. So something disturbed him so much about this guy that he's not going to deliver the papers. He's just going home. One of the boys heard our dog growling, and when he looked up, he saw a second very tall man following Johnny and attempting to talk to him. The man followed Johnny around the corner out of sight. Then the boys heard a car door slam. That noise also woke up a kid in a nearby house. He looked out of the window and saw a blue two-tone car run the stop sign and speed away. So there's some interesting details here in this People magazine article that weren't anywhere else here. The whole abduction sequence took no longer than 12 minutes. Yeah, this is really creepy. And then, of course, this article also has, I mean, another interesting, just through this whole People magazine article, I mean, she describes people, I mean, calls. I mean, she got one call here, June 84. We got a call from a local man who claimed he had information about Johnny and wanted to help. We met with him and became suspicious because he knew so much about the case. The police started monitoring him. Soon, I started getting phone threats. A male caller with an unfamiliar voice said, "Why don't you drop the case before you get hurt, Mrs. Gosch?" The calls continued for months with someone breathing on the other end and hanging up. Within 20 minutes of the call, a man we didn't recognize would appear in our backyard and throw rocks at the windows. We called the police, but they could never catch him. Why didn't they just shoot him in the knee? Then in August 85, I heard from a Tulsa man who said he had information that could close the case. He told me to meet him at a Tulsa hotel and what airline to take. The FBI checked, and indeed the man had made a reservation for me. The decision was made to send the policewoman in my place. The man met her and was arrested, convicted of fraud, and sent to prison. This incident made us feel all the more that our personal safety was now at stake, so with police consent, I held a press conference and said we knew who Johnny's kidnapper was. The local man police had been watching left town, and the threats and harassment stopped, a further indication of his involvement. I mean, if he was really guilty in all this, why would he be drawing attention to himself by going in their backyard and throwing rocks? I mean, right? I mean, if the whole Franklin ring is true and all that, it seems like they hired some stooge guy to do some harassment, or he's just an unrelated psycho. The man is back in Des Moines now. The police can't prove anything against him, so it's still a waiting game, and it may be that way for years. This past February, we received a typed letter postmarked from a western city, supposedly from Johnny. It starts out by saying he was forced to do many things that disgusted him, and that he hopes we will never forget him, and we will continue to love him even though he will not be permitted to return home. He talks about his hair being dyed and his looks being changed. The thing that really hit us was the way the letter was signed, your son, Johnny Gosch. Johnny was the only one of our children who ever signed notes that way. We used to make it a family joke, telling him he didn't have to give us his first and last names and sign things your son because we knew who he was. When I asked the FBI if they thought Johnny wrote it, they said they were keeping an open mind. Does that sound kind of patronizing? Some more dark details here. 6 months after Johnny was kidnapped, our private detective received information about an auction that was being held in Houston. He was told that American boys between the age of 10 and 14 were being sold to foreign buyers. The detective had a contact who had gotten into the auction and agreed to buy Johnny back if he was on the block that night. But Johnny wasn't there. I hope they got all the people involved there. What the heck? That's crazy. John and I have spent hours going through the porn magazines where missing kids have been known to show up. So far, nothing with Johnny's picture has surfaced. It's still May. I have to have something to cling to. There hasn't been a day when Johnny has been out of my thoughts. I keep wondering what he looks like. If he's alive, he's 18 and looks like a man, maybe with a beard. But in our minds, Johnny will always be 12 years old, laughing and happy like he was. We've lived without Johnny a long time now. It's not new to us, but it still hurts. So, yeah, I mean, obviously very, very heart-wrenching for the family. But, yeah, some interesting details there. And also, this was the first time that Johnny is going to go on the route by himself. So, a man in a car, creepy guy, talks to Johnny, asks directions, leaves, and actually asks other boys, then leaves. The boys and Johnny say that the guy is creepy, whatever. And then the guy comes back, talks to him again, and then leaves again. And then Johnny states he's going home now because something's not right with that guy. See, in these situations, I mean, what's the best course of action for him to, like, cut through the neighbors' properties and hop fences, get off the main road? I mean, it's just... And then the other boys actually heard a car door slam. I mean, that's crazy. And the door slam was loud enough that it woke up someone else in the house nearby who saw the car. So, okay, I don't know. What are everybody's thoughts on police involvement? Let's examine more details here. So the police and FBI response, taking 45 minutes until their arrival, during which time Noreen had already collected the witness accounts, suspecting Johnny was a runaway. On September 8th, Noreen says she told police about suspicious incidents occurring just before the abduction, like the phone calls and the policeman who interacted with Johnny at the football game. Noreen sees a story in early October on 2 Des Moines girls forced into prostitution in Nebraska and suggests the police investigate. When Cooney refuses, she holds a press conference to call attention to the story and soon receives a death threat to, quote, stop making waves, end quote. Wow. So she's making waves. Who made this death threat? Police? I mean, this is crazy. Let's continue on here. Noreen's investigation. Hiring private detectives within about a month of Johnny's abduction. Dennis Whalen attended a child auction in Houston, Texas in December '82 to look for Johnny Gosch. I hope he gave all that information to investigators. On March 2nd, '83, Johnny Gosch was sighted in a large southwestern city, later identified as being in Oklahoma. A boy was being chased by two men, ran up to a woman and told her, "Please, lady, help me. My name is John David Gosch," before the men dragged him away. Police initially dismissed the woman's report as a family situation. But what kind of family situation has two grown men strong-arming a boy? I mean, that's weird. But after seeing Johnny Gosch's photograph on TV, the woman recognized him as the boy she had seen and reported it to police again. So she did report it initially. Okay, because that's kind of weird to not report that. So she reported it, brushed off, then she reported it again when she recognized him. The report made its way to Gosch's family's private detectives at the investigative research agency who checked it out with the FBI. Both the PIs and the FBI came to the conclusion that the boy was indeed Johnny Gosch. Early in '84, Noreen was first contacted by a PI from D.C. named Paul Bishop. As she would later reveal, Bishop identified himself as a CIA asset. What the heck? So he was the one who contacted her in 1984. This is weird. In June '84, Noreen was contacted by a local man who claimed to have valuable information on Johnny's case. According to Noreen's sworn 1999 testimony and 2000 book, this was Des Moines PI Sam Soda calling her to arrange a meeting. They met at Soda's office June 13th, 1984. Noreen brought a tape recorder, switched it on, and listened as Soda revealed that there would be a second kidnapping taking place in Des Moines. Soda specified that it would occur on the south side of Des Moines. The victim would be another paperboy, and it would take place on the second weekend in August. He credited the information to an informant. Noreen thanked him for the information, but was puzzled why he didn't go to the police. Why is he telling her of all people? I mean, what? This doesn't make any sense. So she has a tape recording of this. And this is Sam Soda, a local PI. Does this make any sense to anybody? So regarding Sam Soda's involvement here, apparently he did blow the whistle on Frank Sikora, a sexual predator who worked at the paper. So this is an article, October 19th, 1984, UPI archives. A former newspaper employee who confessed to having sexual contact with at least 7 of the young carriers he supervised at Iowa's largest newspaper pled innocent today to sexual abuse charges. Frank Sikora, 37, of Des Moines, turned himself into authorities 7 a.m. and pled innocent to 1 charge of third-degree sexual abuse and 1 count of lewd and lascivious acts with a child. Polk County Associate District Judge Norman Elliott set the bond to $5,000 each count. Sikora was fired from his job in the Des Moines Register's Circulation Department Monday when a PI released a videotape confession in which Sikora discusses his relationship with at least 7 paperboys. However, Haviland said officials do not rely solely on the 2-hour tape made by investigator Sam Soda. He said Thursday's charges were based on information gathered during a police investigation. Police have said a polygraph test earlier this week showed Sikora had no involvement in the disappearance of Register newspaper carriers Johnny Gosch and Eugene Martin. Gosch vanished September 5th, '82 while delivering newspapers. Martin disappeared from his paper route August 12th. On the videotape, Sikora confessed to sleeping with 7 young newspaper carriers who worked as runners on his routes. He said he fondled almost all the boys, Soda said. Soda suggested Sakura may have some information about the missing boys. This is a man who is in a position where he knows all the routes and all the carriers, said Soda. Spokesman of the anti-child pornography group called Stolen Children are reported every day. Okay, other people say Soda is not a trustworthy source. However, if he did this investigation into Sakura and possibly others at the newspaper, I mean, this is crazy. This is crazy. So this newspaper employee is abusing these children, and there could be and these newspaper boys happen to be going missing. I mean, is this all not coincidence? What's going on here? This is not a coincidence, really? I mean, what is going on? And then Sam Soda is now knows the exact date of when someone else is going missing, but he doesn't tell the police, or maybe he does, or maybe does he know the police are compromised? By Noreen's account, she then unsuccessfully tried to convince law enforcement and the media to heed the warning about a second kidnapping. Only Des Moines Register reporter Frank Santiago was willing to listen to the tape. So nobody else even wanted to listen to the tape. They just don't care. This is just so insane. Sometime around August 84, Noreen was invited to testify in Washington, D.C. at Senator Arlen Specter's hearing on pedophile rings. Her book, written in 2000, called the hearings Organized Crime and Its Relationship to Kidnapping, or The Organized Crime Hearings and Its Relationship to Missing Children, but the published title was The Effect of Pornography on Women and Children. Paul Bishop accompanied her to the testimony, which took place August 8th, 1984. And there is a sketch here of the man seen talking to Eugene Martin just before his disappearance. And in September 1984, a federal grand jury in Des Moines subpoenaed Paul Bishop to testify about the Gosch and Martin cases. What? Why? The CIA. Why is the CIA asset involved in these cases? During the month of October, Sam Soda exposed a pedophile named Frank Sakura who worked for the Des Moines Register. I went over that article. In June 1985, a dollar bill surfaced in Sioux City, Iowa, with the message, "I am alive, Johnny Gosch," written on it. 3 handwriting experts confirmed the message as having been written by Johnny Gosch. I mean, how old was it, though? Because this is a dollar bill. Like, how old was the writing on it by June 1985? According to Noreen, shortly after the disappearance of Eugene Martin, she and several others in Des Moines were anonymously mailed a rather curious modified version of the kidnapped John David Gosch poster. Below, the sketch of the man from the blue Ford Fairmont was another sketch that perfectly resembled Sam Soda. And perhaps to illustrate that point, a newspaper photograph of Soda was included right next to the sketch. An arrow was drawn from the sketch of Soda to the sketch of the man in the Ford Fairmont. With the exact date that the poster was while the exact date that the poster was mailed is unknown because it incorporated a photo of Sam Soda from a Des Moines Register article on October 10th, 1984. The poster must have been sent in late 85 at the earliest. It is interesting to note that the Sam Soda composite sketch was not drawn from scratch, but rather modified from the sketch of the man in the blue car, as the hairline, ears, nose, and facial structure are identical. Thus, the poster appears to have been suggesting that Sam Soda was the man in the car seen on the morning of Johnny's abduction. I mean, is anybody having trouble keeping up with the amount of coincidences here? As Noreen would later recount in 1988, the local man who called in June 1984 offering to help on the case, Sam Soda, soon attracted suspicion from the Gosch family because of how much he knew about the pedophile underworld in Des Moines. His foreknowledge of Martin's disappearance and his exposure of a previously unknown pedophile at the Des Moines Register confirmed that. Noreen claims that police began monitoring the man, which in turn led the Gosches to start receiving harassment and threats at home. Are they saying that Sam Soda was the guy threatening them? Okay. Following the Tulsa incident, the Gosch family feared for their safety. So Noreen held a press conference saying they knew who kidnapped Johnny. At the press conference, Noreen referred to 3 men from Des Moines along with a pedophile contact in Houston. She asserted that the police also knew the identities of the men and were doing everything within their legal boundaries to arrest them, a statement to which police gave no comment. Noreen acknowledged that her announcement might cause the kidnappers to flee, but pointed out that that would be revealing too, wouldn't it? Following the press conference, said Noreen, the local man being watched by police, Sam Soda, left town and the harassment against the family stopped. Not long afterwards, the man returned to Des Moines. It is unclear whether the perpetrators she named were actual suspects or if the announcement was some kind of bluff to put pressure on the real person of interest, Soda. On Valentine's Day in 1988, a typed letter by someone claiming to be Johnny arrived at the Gosch home postmarked from Idaho. The author said that the captors dyed his hair, changed his looks, and that he was forced to do things that disgusted him. He asked the Gosches for their continued love and forgiveness, even though he would not be allowed to return home. The letter was signed, your son Johnny Gosch, a very distinctive way that Johnny used to sign notes. According to Noreen, the letter was further validated by its reference to the 1983 incident with Johnny in Oklahoma, which was publicized but never had the city revealed. Bonacci comes forward. By September 1990, the Gosch family stated that their investigation had wound down. Nevertheless, they held firm to their belief that Johnny was taken out of the area in a well-organized kidnapping and resolved to continue working on their case. It was around that time they had received a major lead from John DeCamp, the lawyer for the Franklin child sex ring victim Paul Bonacci. As DeCamp recounted, it was reading a transcript of Bonacci's interview with a psychiatrist and noticed that Bonacci mentioned an incident involving a newspaper carrier in Iowa. DeCamp was struck by its similarity to the Gosch case and went to the library to verify the details, confirming that the date stated by Bonacci matched the date of Johnny's abduction. He contacted the Gosch family in late 1990 to inform them he had a client who confessed to helping abduct Johnny Gosch. The call was taken by John Gosch Sr., who did not tell Noreen about the new information. Though initially skeptical, Leonard Gosch ultimately did come down to the prison to meet Bonacci. DeCamp recalled that John came to Nebraska a couple weeks after their initial contact and walked into the Lincoln Correctional Center to meet with Bonacci. He asked Bonacci, do you know who I am? And Bonacci responded, you look like, it can't be the eyes, you look like Johnny Gosch. John came away from the meeting believing that Bonacci was sincere and telling the truth. Around the time John met with Bonacci in prison, he hired Omaha private detective Roy Stevens to check out Bonacci's story. Stevens spent hundreds of hours interviewing Bonacci and tracking down leads in Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, and Colorado that Bonacci provided. Bonacci described to Stevens how a man named Emilio, who made his living abducting and selling children, brought him to Des Moines to help abduct Johnny Gosch. Emilio was the driver of the blue car who stopped to ask Johnny for directions, and Bonacci was in the back of the car, given the task of holding Johnny down after he was shoved into the car. 2 other people were also implicated by Bonacci in the kidnapping, one of whom who was a local contact in Des Moines. The night before, they stayed at a hotel in Des Moines. Going from a skeptic of Bonacci's to a believer in his account, Stevens insisted that Bonacci hasn't told me anything that hasn't been true. I wonder how much investigation was done. So at the hotel, I mean, did they give fake names? They weren't able to track these guys from the hotel? Or they paid cash, whatever? Noreen Gosch did not learn about Bonacci until March 91, although accounts differ on whether it was her husband or Roy Stevens who first informed her. The account in which her husband was the one to inform her contains what is likely a false explanation of why Noreen was not in the loop regarding Bonacci from the beginning, giving more credibility to the account in Noreen's book that it was Stevens who first called her about Bonacci's confession and visited Des Moines to show her tapes of Bonacci interviews. To test Bonacci's veracity, the Gosches gave Stevens a photo for Bonacci to identify of a Des Moines man whom they had already suspected of being involved in the abduction. Stevens only received a photo, not a name or any other identifying information. When Stevens placed it in a lineup of a dozen photos, Bonacci picked out the Des Moines man, said the man's name, and identified him as the local contact who came to the motel the night before with a photo of Johnny, informing the kidnappers that he was the kid they were going to take. As Noreen told the Des Moines Register, this contact in Des Moines had been under suspicion by the family for some time. The Des Moines man was not identified in news reports at the time, but the Gosches said that Bonacci provided good information on him and identified his photograph, and stated that PIs were gathering information on him almost daily. His first name of Sam would eventually be publicized, and in 2000, Noreen explicitly revealed that the man picked out of the lineup was Sam Soda. It can be seen above that even as far back as 1986, Soda was suspected by the Gosch family. At the end of June 1991, it was made public that Roy Stevens was investigating good information that had recently surfaced in Johnny's case. No specifics were revealed until a month later when news stories began to break about Bonacci's confession to helping abduct Johnny Gosch. In October 91, Bonacci gave his first detailed public account of the Johnny Gosch abduction. He claimed to have met the ringleader Emilio as a young boy living in Carter Lake, Iowa. The day before the abduction, Emilio took him from Omaha to a hotel in Des Moines where they met men named Sam and Tony. Bonacci described Sam as white, medium height, and heavy, and Tony as tall, blonde with a bad complexion. In the motel room the night before the abduction, Sam was showing Emilio photographs of various paperboys, telling him how much money he could make off of them. One photo, that of Johnny Gosch, was separated from the stack. Early the next morning, all of them went out to abduct Johnny. Bonacci rode in the back of the car driven by Emilio. At a certain point, the car stopped and a boy was shoved in. Following the orders of Emilio, Bonacci held the boy down and chloroformed him. All of the kidnappers drove off, with Johnny's body being transferred between the other two vehicles driven by Sam and Tony. They stopped in Council Bluffs, Iowa to get a drink, then brought Johnny to a farmhouse near Sioux City, owned by a man named Charlie. Johnny was scared and crying and asked Bonacci what was going to happen to him. For at least a week, Johnny was kept in a locked, windowless room at the farmhouse. Subsequently, Johnny ended up being held captive in Colorado, where Bonacci saw him again in March 1986. Paul Bonacci's account of meeting Johnny Gosch predated the visit from John Gosch Sr. In October 1990, while Bonacci was in prison, he had been since '89, CARICOR investigator Robert Hansel met with Alicia Owens' mother to discuss the contents of Bonacci's diary. One passage referred to an incident in September '82 in which Emilio took Bonacci to a farmhouse in Iowa where two boys were being held captive. The older of the two boys was named Johnny, came from Des Moines, was about 13 years old, had blue eyes, brown hair, and wore a Kim's Academy shirt with black athletic pants. All of these characteristics noted down in Bonacci's diary, including the clothing, match up with Johnny Gosch at the time of his abduction. Not only would Bonacci not have access to these diaries while in prison, but forensic analysis verified that Bonacci's diaries were written contemporaneously with the events they referred to. Robert Hansel confirmed that Johnny Gosch had surfaced in the Franklin investigation no later than July 1990, and from other kids besides Bonacci. Throughout the past decade, many had tried to deceive the Gosch family into thinking they had information on Johnny. Unlike these hoaxers, Bonacci not only knew multiple obscure like tongue and leg scars, and undisclosed, a stutter when stressed and being taken by Noreen to her yoga classes, personal characteristics of Johnny Gosch, but possessed substantial information about the abduction logistics, which had never been revealed to the public. Photos taken of Johnny before the abduction. The Gosch's PI turned up a witness in the neighborhood who saw Johnny being photographed by a stranger a couple weeks before his kidnapping. This discovery was never publicized. In Paul Bonacci's account of the abduction, he described how Sam brought a photograph of Johnny and told the kidnappers that he was the boy they would abduct, matching this then unrevealed information that Johnny had been photographed by a third party in advance of his kidnapping. Beyond just knowing the existence of pre-abduction photography, Bonacci's description of the photograph shown by Sam matched the location where in the neighborhood Johnny was, and circumstances, Johnny carrying his paper bag, of the photos as described by the neighbor. How the abduction took place. As discussed above, Bonacci identified Sam Soto's photograph from a lineup and named his as Sam. The fact that he could identify a Des Moines man whom the Gosches had already come to suspect in their own investigation confirms Bonacci's knowledge of the circumstances behind the abduction. Moreover, Bonacci accurately described the multiple vehicles that were involved in the abduction. As explained below, press reports consistently claimed that there were different vehicles on Ashworth and Marquardt, even though the Gosches had concluded that the same car simply drove around the block. Bonacci only described one blue car that approached Johnny and then drove around the block to abduct him, contradicting most public reports but matching what private investigators had found. Aside from the car publicly mentioned by police, the Gosch's private investigators also discovered a van that had been in the neighborhood, and Bonacci knew about it. Noreen described how one of her investigators spoke to a man who noticed something very strange on the morning of the abduction. A van was sitting parked on the street with its motor running. After some time, a car drove up. The passengers of that car transferred a large object with a blanket into their van. Then both vehicles left. What? That's crazy. Bonacci independently matched these unpublicized details in his own account of the abduction, mentioning a van driven by Tony that they transferred Johnny's body into. He also described there being a station wagon near the scene of the abduction that was driven by Sam. According to Noreen, the Iowa DMV confirmed to her that Sam Soda did own a vehicle matching Bonacci's description. Wow. I mean, how many people's heads are spinning now? Because I know a lot of people just totally and outright dismiss Bonacci. But, like, he just keeps nailing all these details. Like, it's, how can you just discount this? It's crazy. Johnny Gosch was here at a Denver restaurant. Bonacci's story to Roy Stevens, given in late 1990 and early 1991, involved Johnny being taken to Colorado. At the time, there was no reason for anyone to think Johnny had been in Colorado. Then, in the summer of 1991, family friends of the Gosches who were at a Mexican restaurant in Denver noticed Johnny Gosch was here written on the bathroom wall. This was a remarkable after-the-fact validation of Bonacci's claims regarding Johnny's whereabouts. After this sighting made its way back to the Gosch family, Roy Stevens went to check out the lead. He took several photos of the restaurant, including its exterior and the bathroom wall. When Bonacci was shown a picture of nothing but the restaurant from the outside, he accurately described the distinctive interior and recounted how he, Johnny, and another boy were painting their nails, then went into the bathroom and wrote on the wall using their red nail polish. Indeed, the message turned out to have been written with red nail polish, validating Bonacci's scenario of being with Johnny. I mean, that's definitely a specific thing to write with. Most people would say marker or whatever, pen. I mean, nail polish, wow. Bonacci had also received many letters during his incarceration which referred to J.G. or Johnny, Emilio, and the COL. These were, according to Bonacci, sent to him by former victims of the Franklin Ring. One letter, postmarked June 1990 from Sacramento, referred to J.G. getting face surgery and going back to blonde, and that stated the colonel is gone to Mexico and took J.G. with him. And again, is it just coincidentally that there's this other John Gosch who died in Mexico, whose body turns up in Mexico. Another letter alluded to the other missing boys from Des Moines, like Eugene Martin, stating that JG was not the only boy we got from DM. Following his revelation of it to Roy Stevens, Bonacci showed Stevens a letter discussing the 1986 graffiti at the Mexican restaurant in Denver, which included the excerpt, "I remember the restaurant in Colorado, we painted our nails, and I wrote on the wall, with JG." Alright, so we're going to go even further into Mindshock land now here. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. I mean, I don't know how people just discredit all of this, but the coincidence stacks are so high. So, the first America's Most Wanted episode on the case airs November 92. Jimmy Gibson comes forward in early 1993. He meets with Noreen. He stays in various places such as Nebraska with DeCamp and Reverend Morrow, the Gosch hobby farm outside of Woodward, Iowa, and perhaps Mary Schmidt's Hotel in Deadwood, South Dakota. Subsequent episodes of America's Most Wanted air, which interview Jimmy and visit the house in Colorado. The Charlie Kerr farm surveillance is ruined by Leonard John Gosch, divorced not long after, hobby farm in Dallas County, Iowa. Okay, so what is this all about? So Charlie Kerr is this supposed Chuck, Charlie, whatever. This is where some believe Johnny and others were taken immediately after the abduction. So Leonard John Gosch, Johnny Gosch's own father, is alleged to have warned Charlie Kerr that he was going to be arrested. And this is what caused basically the incident that caused the divorce. Now, this is just completely mind-shocking. But I'm going to go in order here on the Cav Def. Right up. So we'll get to that in a moment. So, controversies, other missing kids. It is suspected, but not confirmed, that the 1984 disappearance of Eugene Martin and the 1986 disappearance of Mark Allen are both connected to the same pedophile ring said to have abducted Johnny. All three boys were from Des Moines and about 13 years old at the time of the disappearances, and roughly 2 years passed between each boy going missing, potentially implying some kind of pattern. Johnny and Eugene were particularly alike as they were both paper boys for the Des Moines Register. Another boy in the Midwest commonly linked to Johnny's abduction is Jacob Wetterling, who was kidnapped in Minnesota in 1989. Jacob's involvement in the Franklin pedophile ring is highly disputed. In 2016, local pedophile Danny Heinrich confessed to abducting and murdering Jacob and led them to his body, which was the same age as when he was abducted. Some local investigators, however, maintain that the body found was not really Jacob at all. What? I haven't seen that. They point to anomalies such as animal bones initially being found at the burial site amongst Jacob's clothing, and how police announced they would DNA test Jacob's alleged remains but do not appear to have released any results. I wonder what the date of this is. I'm gonna double check this in a moment. Former New York Police Department officer Jim Rothstein, who did investigative work for Noreen, is one such person who believes the Wetterling case is still unresolved. Prior to Heinrich's confession, Noreen divulged in her book that Bonacci got a letter from another Franklin victim identifying Emilio and Charlie Kerr as participants in Jacob's abduction. She also claimed in a 2013 Franklin Files post, likely citing Rothstein, who said the same in a 2018 interview, that Sam Soda was in St. Cloud, Minnesota immediately before the kidnapping. In the same interview, Rothstein claimed that Soda's presence in St. Cloud was under the cover of working for the Rowan Trucking Company, a non-publicized piece of information that Soda himself would later corroborate in an interview with the Faded Out podcast. Michaela Garrick, a 9-year-old girl abducted from the San Fran area in 1988, was long suspected to be another victim of Tony, The description that Bonacci gave of Tony was remarkably similar to the description of Michaela's kidnapper, and when Roy Stevens showed Bonacci sketches from several child abductions that resembled his Tony description, Bonacci adamantly identified the sketch from Michaela's case. In December 2020, David Mish was arrested for Michaela's kidnapping and murder based on an alleged identification of a handprint on Michaela's scooter that the kidnapper had moved near his car to lure her over. That case is currently in progress, and it remains to be seen whether the evidence holds up in court, although Mish's involvement does not negate the pre-existing evidence of a larger plot behind her kidnapping. Back in 1989, U.S. Customs agents found indications that Michaela Garrecht and Amber Swartz Garcia, another Bay Area kidnapping victim from earlier in 1988, were trafficked by pedophile Richard Hellwig. Two child victims of Hellwig in Mexico identified Michaela and Amber as having been with Hellwig, and the mother of those victims said, but later recanted, that Hellwig gave her earrings identical to the ones worn by Michaela. Hellwig had been busted across the border near San Diego with child pornography information on ages of consent in various countries, copies of the NAMBLA bulletin, and other pedophilia-related items. His San Francisco address was the same as the address for the NAMBLA chapter in that city. NAMBLA itself has been linked to the Franklin pedophile ring, with Alicia Owens' lawyer reportedly finding evidence of a $5 million account for NAMBLA at the Franklin Credit Union. Okay, wow. That's a lot to unpack there. An interesting point here on Mark Allen, which is also suspicious. This is a post on charlieross.wordpress.com, November 27, 2010. A lot of people know that two boys named Johnny Gosch, age 12, and Eugene Martin, age 13, disappeared from Des Moines, Iowa in the 80s and were never found. But there was a third boy, 13-year-old Mark James Warren Allen, who also vanished mysteriously from Des Moines during that time period. And for whatever reason, he never gets any media attention. The police refused to investigate for 2 days. You'd think that from the previous two disappearances, they would have learned that time is of the essence, but no. So Mark Allen went missing March 29th, 1986, the day before Easter. Again, I mean, with these holidays, some of these Satanists, man. 13-year-old Mark James Warren Allen told his mother he planned to walk to a friend's house down the street but never arrived at the neighbor's home, and he hasn't been seen since. Based on previous media reports, Allen initially was thought to be the third Iowa paperboy to vanish without a trace during the 80s. Johnny Gosch, 12, of West Des Moines, disappeared September 5th, 1982. 13-year-old Eugene Martin vanishes from Des Moines' south side just 2 years later, 84, under very similar circumstances. An in-depth Des Moines Register article on Iowa's missing persons published August 18th, 2013 confirmed Allen was not a paperboy. Teen was handful, shifted back and forth. Mark's mother, Nancy Allen, admitted her son had been a handful. The teen had been shifted back and forth between her Iowa residence and his father's Minnesota home most of his young life, and he'd often get into trouble. But in late November 2010, a week normally filled with family get-togethers, shopping, and holiday activities, Nancy took time to speak with WHO TV Channel 13's Aaron Brillback about what it's like waiting so many years for answers and wondering about the fate of a young son who never quite seemed to fit in. It was hard because he had been living with his dad for a while, then came back and lived with me, Nancy said. November 25th, 2010. His younger brother and older sister were real close, and he wanted to be in there in tight. They never got a chance for that to happen. The night before Easter 86, the teen left his Southwest Emma Avenue home to hang out with friends and perhaps take in a movie just as his siblings prepared for a pizza dinner. He walked out the door and the kids were getting ready to have pizza, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. Allen told Brillback, the last thing he said to me as he walked out the door was, "Save me some pizza, Mom. I'll be hungry when I get home." Nancy watched her son walk down the sidewalk past the bushes, and then he was gone. He waved when he got to the bushes, and I waved at him, and that was that, and I never saw him again," his mother said. The next morning, when Nancy realized Mark hadn't come home the night before, she knew immediately something wasn't right, but hoped against hope he'd prove her wrong. "It was Easter Sunday, so I thought maybe he went to Grandma's, knowing Grandma would have an Easter basket there for each of the kids. So I asked my mom, but he wasn't there," she said. "I had phone numbers for his friends, called all of them. No one had seen him." Alan said she called police, but they told her they couldn't do anything for 48 hours. Days turned into months. Police checked in Minnesota, where Mark's father lived, and in Connecticut, where the boy's paternal grandmother lived. Nothing. Alan told Brilbeck she didn't know whether her son's disappearance was linked to the disappearances of Johnny Gosch and Eugene Martin, but said police seemed reluctant to help her because of the other missing teens. Wait, what? Because other missing people because there's other missing people, they're not going to help her? What the heck is this? I just feel like at this time they were just afraid of what would happen with the Eugene Martin and Gosch thing. I got the distinct feeling that they did not want parents to be frightened to let their children sell newspapers or do different things, she said. What? So they intentionally downplayed his case in the media, which seemed to have worked because the Mark Allen case is the least publicized. I mean, in most of these write-ups I'm reading on Gosch, they only mention Eugene Martin as the other missing. I mean, maybe because he was also a paper boy, but still, I mean, this is still relevant if there's a 2-year pattern here. The Des Moines Police Department Sergeant Jeff Edwards disagrees. "I know detectives followed up on leads that did not pan out," Edwards told Brilbeck in a separate interview, aired Thanksgiving Day 2010. "They were not able to locate him. He's still listed as a missing person." No kidding. Mark's mother said she doesn't know whether her son is dead or alive, but after 25 years, she'd like to know for sure, so she and her son can find peace. "There are times when the news says they found a body and they're not sure how old it is, but they're pretty sure it's male," said Nancy. "And in one instant, you hold your breath and bite your fingernails and hope that it's not your child. And in other ways, you wish they would come out and say that it is your child, so you can finally bury them and go to rest." Mark Allen was last seen wearing a light blue t-shirt, blue jean shorts, white socks, gray tennis shoes with Velcro tabs. He has a small scar on the top of his head, and his first name might be spelled Mark with a K by some agencies involving missing children and persons. To date, there is no definitive evidence connecting Mark Allen's case to that of Johnny Gosch or Eugene Martin. So apparently a DNA sample was only submitted. Oh, a DNA sample was submitted. Okay. Regarding Jacob Wetterling, I actually can't find a definitive link. Just reports that it's him, but I can't find any official statements about the results of the DNA on the remains. Now, I guess I'm going to have to do a podcast on the Wetterling case because apparently... Actually, there's CBS News stated in September 3rd, 2016 that a forensic odontologist identified the remains as Wetterling's. So this is dental or from his teeth? I mean, again, if this was some kind of cover-up, obviously they could have done that. It would be nice to have multiple independent verifications here and DNA on the bone fragments, not just the teeth. Because supposedly they were testing the remains, so I don't know. This is really bizarre. Also, supposedly his DNA was found on other kidnapped victims. So, again, this is not a Wetterling podcast. I'm not going to go too far down that. So, depending on how quickly he would have been killed. Also, yeah, the timeline's weird. So supposedly they confirmed it was him before the results. I don't know. This is weird. So, let's continue on here. Back to CavDef. Father's involvement. Since the late 90s, there have been suggestions that Johnny's father, Leonard John Gosch, was complicit in his son's kidnapping. No definitive evidence of his involvement has ever surfaced, All the while, Noreen Gosch and others have alleged many instances of suspicious behavior on Leonard's part, and he is known to be deceptive about key facts of the case. One question that has never been answered is why Johnny, on the one day he got abducted, did the paper route by himself instead of being accompanied by his father as usual. As Noreen stated in 1988 and in her 2000 book, Leonard always went with Johnny on Sunday mornings, and Leonard himself said this in the film Who Took Johnny, that, quote, I was with him every Sunday morning except that particular Sunday morning that he was kidnapped, end quote. Going out that morning without Leonard left Johnny far more open to being abducted. Indeed, it is unlikely that an abduction would have succeeded in Leonard's presence. That Johnny broke this pattern for the first time on September 5th, 1982, and happened to be abducted the same day is incredible enough to raise suspicion that him being alone that morning was planned. I'm still kind of reeling from the woman taking his photograph from weeks before. I mean, that's kind of, I can't get over that. I mean, that's so creepy. That's so creepy. And then, yeah, people, when you combine it with the phone calls and all these statements Leonard supposedly made, Noreen goes over them in the book, like last chance to go fishing that summer. I mean, with Johnny, there were certain statements that Leonard had made. Supposedly he was very agitated, and then all those phone calls. Some alleged he was being blackmailed in some capacity. Noreen also said Leonard threatened his own suicide from pressure or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely weird. Let's continue on here. At first glance, since it was up to Johnny to wake his father, not the other way around, this suspicion does not reflect on Leonard. Noreen stated as far back as 1988 that on the night before the kidnapping, Johnny asked to do the route alone, and she and her husband refused. But he disobeyed to deliver papers by himself that morning. But Noreen claimed in her book that when Johnny asked to do the route on his own, Leonard initially said yes before Noreen overruled him. Furthermore, even though Noreen refused his request, Johnny came back downstairs shortly after going to bed to hug his mother again and tell her, "You are the best." Based on that, there are indications that Leonard went behind Noreen's back to ensure that Johnny would go out unaccompanied that next morning. I mean, how would anybody know if Leonard did? Yeah, if he did go to Johnny later and say, yeah, you could actually go by yourself. How would anybody other than them know? This was far from the only irregular occurrence involving Leonard that Noreen alleged in her book. According to her, Leonard began acting very erratically a few months prior to Johnny's abduction, and his behavior only worsened afterwards. While many of her accusations about Leonard have not been corroborated, some of them have, and his inconsistent false statements about the case, see below, illustrate a general lack of credibility on his part. Early in 1982, Leonard allegedly developed a very hateful attitude, which he took out on all of Noreen's kids, but especially her older son, Joe Gosch. In June 82, he purportedly arranged a fishing trip with Joe and Johnny to Lake of the Ozarks because it might be their, quote, last or only opportunity to do so, end quote. And when they got back, Noreen's son told her that Leonard was very evidently depressed. The next month, while Leonard was on a business trip in Raleigh, North Carolina, he allegedly called Noreen threatening to kill himself because he could no longer live with it. And she had to make the Raleigh police do a welfare check. It can be surmised from Noreen's account that something happened in 1982 that put Leonard under a substantial amount of stress. So this is August 82, before the abduction, or even earlier than, no, July. This is July's business trip. Okay, then in August 82, Noreen claims that Leonard took Johnny on a day trip to Omaha, with one of their destinations being Offutt Air Force Base. Johnny was said to have had a foggy memory of the trip. Per Noreen's account, immediately after the Omaha trip, she and Leonard began receiving those hang-up phone calls every Sunday morning, 1 a.m. They continued until the day of Johnny's abduction, when Leonard answered not with wrong number as he usually did, but instead gave the caller a series of affirmative responses. After Johnny was kidnapped, the calls stopped. These calls have only received limited corroboration, but if true, they raise the questions about what Leonard was up to in the weeks just before Johnny's abduction. Oh, I do not like this Omaha trip. Johnny couldn't recall what happened. Then there's also a CIA asset calling Noreen afterwards to try to be involved in the case. So just a few weeks, he's at Air Force Base. Did the woman taking his pictures, was that after their visit to the Air Force Base? What kind of personnel at the Air Force Base might have seen Johnny? I mean, this is kind of weird. This is really weird. After Johnny was kidnapped, Noreen was forced to shoulder most of the responsibility for keeping the case alive, as Leonard was less inclined to go out in the public eye. Behind the scenes, meanwhile, the marriage was in serious turmoil, according to Noreen. Leonard began spending most of his time on purported business trips, not informing Noreen of his plans, whereabouts, or contact information while he was gone. Much of his time away was spent in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Omaha, Nebraska. There's Omaha again. They did still make public appearances together on the case, but some of them turned disastrous. Following an event near Davenport, Iowa, August 17, 1984, they were invited to, Leonard severely beat Noreen, an accusation corroborated by Scott County Sheriff's Deputy Sam Raley. Wow. After Franklin scandal victim Paul Bonacci confessed his involvement in Johnny's abduction, his attorney, John DeCamp, informed the Gosch family, but Noreen has accused Leonard of hiding this information from her. It was acknowledged even back in 1992 that Leonard checked out Bonacci on his own for several months before Noreen found out, and Leonard confirmed in 2018 interviews that he visited Bonacci in prison with John DeCamp and private investigator Roy Stevens, but not his wife. The question is whether Leonard's intent was to inform Noreen about Bonacci eventually, or keep the information hidden from her indefinitely. While the 92 article claims that it was Leonard who ultimately informed her about Bonacci, there are doubts about how accurately it describes Noreen and Leonard's motivations. It claims that Leonard checked out Bonacci during a period of 6 or 7 months from late 1990 to March 91, when Noreen had completely shut down on the case. But there are newspaper quotes of her during that period which contradict that. It is therefore unexplained why Leonard spent a long period of time investigating Bonacci without telling Noreen, especially if he didn't seem that interested in any other aspect of the investigation. Is it because he knew Bonacci had real credible info? Per Noreen's later account in her book, she was actually informed not by her husband, but by Roy Stevens. In 1999 court testimony and her book, Noreen claimed that Leonard, in fact, went to great lengths to hide Bonacci from her, visiting key people from the Franklin investigation with a woman other than Noreen, who he introduced as his wife. Okay, all right. We're kind of going past the point of no return with Leonard here. I mean, this is not looking good. Noreen's book has a picture of this alleged Noreen impersonator standing beside Leonard, and the woman is exactly who Noreen claims, a Nebraska private eye who used to work with Roy Stevens. Yet the woman in question denies ever playing the role of a Noreen imposter and insists the image is faked. There is no definitive proof either way at the moment. If, however, the image is authentic, then it is clear that Leonard did have someone impersonate his wife, which certainly indicates an intent to deceive Noreen. See, this is kind of weird, though, because if this is just a woman who works with Roy Stevens and unbeknownst to her, Leonard just introduced her as his wife and she didn't, whatever, it was an awkward moment and she didn't jump in to clarify, etc. But why would she claim the image is faked? I mean, that's a bridge too far there. And now can Roy Stevens be trusted? But then again, he uncovered so much of this. Why wouldn't he be? I mean, I don't know. A lot of this does not make any sense. The final alleged incident between Noreen and Leonard had to do with the investigation of Charlie Kerr, on whose Iowa farmhouse Johnny was said to be held for a brief period of time following his abduction. Bonacci only knew Kerr by his first name, Charlie, but according to Noreen, he was able to draw a picture which Roy Stevens matched to Kerr with the help of Sioux City authorities. Kerr was described by Noreen as having a lengthy rap sheet for sexual offenses against children. The county attorney in Sioux City then purportedly arranged for a months-long surveillance operation on Kerr. One day in 1993, the county attorney informed Noreen that they were about to arrest Charlie Kerr, and she told her husband, believing she could trust him. Later that day, Noreen got an angry call from the county attorney saying that Leonard had driven up to Kerr's trailer and gone inside to speak with him, which resulted in Kerr fleeing the area before they could arrest him. According to Noreen, for whatever reason, Leonard went to tip off Charlie Kerr about the impending arrest. This incident has not been definitively proven, but Jimmy Gibson corroborated the story, and certain details check out. Noreen described Kerr as having a record of pedophilia and living in a trailer, both of which are proven true by a Sioux City police report. It appears that the arrest of one of the perpetrators in Johnny's abduction was sabotaged by Johnny's own father, which is highly suspicious. Noreen and Leonard divorced very shortly after September 1993. Wow. Okay. I mean, the plot has thickened so much here. I mean, I really don't know what to make of this. Is that not true, though? Like, how can it be verified? I mean, obviously this chart, okay, is there evidence that there was an impending arrest? Is there evidence that Leonard went to tip off Kerr? I mean, there's definitely, the father is just highly suspect given all of these other issues here. I mean, this is just highly suspect. I mean, and how heartbreaking that, again, this is Mindshock. I'm not alleging anything is true or untrue. But if this theory is true, again, I'm not stating it is, but if it is, how heartbreaking is that for Johnny? Set up by his own father to get kid. I mean, this is, and again, something's not right. I'm going home. I mean, his statement from the other witness, I mean, that's just creepy on so many levels. That, like, there are these weird people driving around talking to him, and he's just going home. I mean, it's just, yeah, this is one rough case. Following the divorce between him and Noreen, Leonard disappeared from public view, aside from a statement to the Des Moines Register in 1999 denouncing Noreen's claim that Johnny had visited her. And also for Noreen, how does your heart not break for Noreen? She has to go through all this, and also the possibility that your own husband, the father of your missing son, might have been responsible and involved. He then reemerged on 2011 to give his own side of the story, vanished with Beth Holloway in 2011 to the company Rumor behind Who Took Johnny in 2012, and most recently to Sarah DeMeo, who ran the Faded Out podcast in 2018. Leonard insisted that Noreen and Paul Bonacci's versions of events was untrue. However, numerous statements that he made were at odds with the established record and even his own prior statements. Flip-flop on Paul Bonacci. Leonard told Sarah that he knew Paul Bonacci was lying from the very first meeting. He claimed that he asked Bonacci how tall Johnny was, and Bonacci responded that Johnny was 5'2", even though Johnny was a big kid for his age at 5'7". Then, according to Leonard, he spoke to a prison guard who informed him that Bonacci's cell was full of newspapers about the Gosch case, proof that Bonacci was studying the details of the case to insert himself into the story. But then how did he not memorize the height? No corroboration exists for Leonard's account to Fade It Out, and much of it is explicitly contradicted. In Bonacci's diary, he estimated Johnny's height to be 5'5", which is very close to accurate. Furthermore, what Leonard told Sarah about Bonacci immediately exposing himself as a con man contradicts his own statements from 1991 and 1992. Most egregiously, in April 92, he held a press conference at John DeCamp's office endorsing the Franklin cover-up, which lauds Bonacci as a credible witness in the Gosch case, and said, "Paul told my wife and I things we've never told anybody." On Inside Edition, Leonard called law enforcement's refusal to interview Bonacci a major cover-up and pushed back against law enforcement accusations that Bonacci was a pathological liar. It is also weird, though, like, if he was responsible, was he just going along to get along and then he flip-flops later? I mean, there's a lot that doesn't make sense here. Lie about going home immediately upon finding John's wagon. Johnny's wagon. In recounting the morning of September 5th, 82, Leonard said on Faded Out that as soon as he found Johnny's wagon abandoned, he knew something was wrong and quickly headed home to have Noreen call the police. This has been a fairly consistent part of Leonard's story, also being told by him in America's MIA Children 1992 and Who Took Johnny 2014. Yet, a September 6th, 1982 news article says that after neighbors called the Gosches at 7:45 a.m. asking where their Sunday papers were, Leonard went out and found the wagon, realized Johnny was missing, but delivered all of Johnny's papers before calling the police at 8:30 a.m. That's super weird. The 8:30 a.m. time is corroborated by the police report, and also indicates that Leonard's account of coming home immediately upon finding the wagon is false unless the neighbors called after 8 a.m., far later than has ever been claimed. Claim that sometimes Johnny went alone on Sunday mornings. Leonard stated during his Faded Out interviews that he did not accompany Johnny on his paper route every Sunday morning, just the vast majority of them. As detailed above, both Noreen, as far back as 1988, before any conceivable motive to make Leonard look bad after the divorce, and Leonard himself contradict that, stating that Leonard always accompanied Johnny except on the day Johnny was abducted. Disavowing the proofs of life for Johnny. When asked about it by Sarah, Leonard responded that he never believed any of the occurrences supposedly indicating Johnny was still alive, sightings, dollar bills, etc., were actually Johnny. Yet in the 80s, Leonard clearly viewed these proof of life as authentic. He was right alongside Noreen at an 85 press conference where they both announced the I Am Alive dollar bill, including the verification of Johnny's handwriting. At the press conference, Leonard called the dollar bill a source of additional hope that Johnny was alive. In the 84 documentary Kidnapped by a Stranger, when asked about the evidence that Johnny was still alive, Leonard cited phone calls made to Noreen as well as the Oklahoma sighting, which he explained in great detail. The origin of the Emilio sketch and name. Leonard made two strange claims about the kidnapper more commonly known as Emilio. The widely distributed sketch came not from the Gosches but from the police. And the name Emilio originated not from Paul Bonacci but from the Gosches' private investigator Dennis Whalen. An old Des Moines Register article shows that the Gosch family held a press conference in November 1982 where they unveiled two sketches of the kidnapper they had commissioned, which are the same sketches still in use today. Police insisted that their sketch was similar to the Gosches, but the police sketch was not released. Why would it not be released? Leonard was also even quoted in the article as criticizing the sketch made to police, claiming that the witnesses considered it very inaccurate. As for the origin of the name Emilio, no evidence exists that anyone used the name prior to Bonacci, and Leonard did not explain how Bonacci would have come across a name used by their private investigator. If Whalen and Bonacci did use the same name, it was almost certainly independently, which only strengthens Bonacci's credibility. Curiously, Bonacci described Emilio as selling children at auctions, and Whalen was known to have attended one such child auction while searching for Johnny. The Sam Soda rehabilitation. Despite Sam Soda having been a person of interest for the Gosches since very early on in the investigation, all that Leonard recounted about Sam on Faded Out was that he did some investigative work on the case and had mafia connections. Well, with a name like that. It cannot be credibly asserted that Leonard was unaware of Sam being a prime suspect in the abduction, because he co-authored an opinion piece with Noreen which called the local man in Des Moines named Sam a longtime suspect who Paul Bonacci had accurately identified. This attempted rehabilitation of Sam Soda's image is part of a larger issue. The multitude of inconsistent statements by Leonard demonstrates a severe lack of credibility on his part. Leonard's motives for repeatedly misrepresenting the facts of the case are unknown. The apparent intention, however, is to rewrite history in a very self-serving manner. All of Leonard's inconsistencies revise the facts of the case in a particular direction, erasing details that might portray him in a suspicious light, i.e. Johnny having never done the route before, him delaying the call to police, attacking claims by Noreen, the proofs of life, Sam Soda's guilt, and attacking evidence of the Franklin connection, Paul Bonacci accurately describing Johnny Emilio origin. As for why denying a link to Franklin might be self-serving for Leonard, that gets to the darkest allegations that have been levied against him. After they both testified at Bonacci's 1999 civil damages hearing, Noreen showed Larry King's photographer, Rusty Nelson, a photo of Leonard to see if he could identify it. The photo itself had no other information attached to it. Nelson responded that he had seen the man before in Larry King's office at the Franklin Credit Union. He also recognized the man as having been at the Max, a gay bar in Omaha that King would frequent to find child prostitutes, where he originally recruited Nelson. Rusty Nelson's identification of Leonard implicated Johnny Gosch's father as a likely participant in the Franklin pedophile network. Wow. I mean, this just gets more and more mind-shocking. I was not prepared for this level of mind-shock. Noreen claimed to receive additional confirmation of Leonard's involvement in the Franklin milieu from a West Des Moines co-worker of hers. This co-worker was a young man who had grown up in Omaha. According to Noreen, he kept looking at her while on the job, and when she went to the stockroom, he followed her inside, asking to speak with her. Noreen's co-worker recounted how, as a teenager, he used to go to the Omaha club called The Mark. While at The Mark, Larry King attempted to recruit him for child pornography and prostitution, and Leonard was also seen there multiple times. The club allegedly was well known as a place where pedophiles could pick up young boys and young girls. More claims linking Leonard to Franklin soon came out directly from Omaha child abuse victims. In 2008, a parent Franklin victim, David Schurter, released a walking tour of the old market area in Omaha. One of the locations he pointed out, a favorite hangout in his words, was Star's Restaurant, below Godfather's Pizza, where he had worked as a waiter. Schurter expressed a tentative belief that he had seen Leonard eating at Star's Restaurant. Star's was a gay bar in Omaha, just as the Max was. In a 2009 chat on the Franklin Files website, Paul Bonacci said that when he first met Leonard while in prison, he knew he had seen Leonard before, most likely at Offutt Air Force Base during the early 80s. What? That observation might lend context to Noreen's allegation that Leonard took Johnny to Offutt Air Force Base at the beginning of August 82. What is going on at that Air Force Base? And why was Paul Bonacci there? And can anybody verify that Leonard took Johnny there? LA pedophile ring victim Darren Reimer told his own disturbing story that paralleled the Omaha allegations about Leonard. In '74, at the age of 10, Darren ended up getting drawn into a well-connected pedophile group involving child prostitution and the production of child pornography. He was one of many children forced to act in pornographic films and photo shoots and sexually service men who appeared to be quite wealthy. The network's apparent ringleader was Guy Strait, Strait, a Hollywood resident who jumped bail after his 1973 arrest for selling child pornography with DOM Lyric and did not resurface publicly until 1976. Strait admitted to knowing other pedophile ring operators in the 70s like John Norman. Locations all around Inglewood, California and Santa Monica, California were sites for this abuse, and one location in particular was a nightclub called the Green Horse, allegedly a location where men would go to pick up children for sex. Darren was adamant that Leonard John Gosch was one of the men who he saw at that nightclub. He claimed that upon seeing a photo of Leonard for the first time, he had a flashback to his own experience back in 1974 at the Green Horse. So where was Leonard living in 1974? I mean, where? Though he first experienced this around 2008 when he began studying Franklin, he still experiences these flashbacks when shown a photo of Leonard in 2018. Noreen had allegedly confirmed to Darren that Leonard, whose job involved taking business trips across the country, did in fact visit Los Angeles. This mentions Leonard being at a nightclub where adult pedophiles sought out kids corroborates the claims about his activities in Omaha. Because Darren's experience was in Los Angeles in 1974, his story implies that Leonard was involved in a nationwide pedophile group for a substantial amount of time before Johnny's abduction. Darren also related what he heard from Jimmy Gibson, a Franklin victim who appeared on America's Most Wanted and was active on websites about the Franklin and Gosch case. After Jimmy came forward to America's Most Wanted in '93, he stayed at many residences throughout the Midwest, one of which was Leonard's hobby farm northwest of Des Moines. The overall credibility of Jimmy Gibson is its own controversial issue, but key aspects of his story have checked out, including the existence of Leonard's hobby farm, which Jimmy was the first person to mention. Jimmy painted a highly unfavorable picture of Leonard, claiming that Leonard was violent and even tried to rape him on one occasion. He also corroborated Noreen's account of Leonard sabotaging the county attorney's arrest of Charlie Kerr. According to Jimmy, Kerr had blackmail material on Leonard regarding a criminal enterprise they were both involved in. Kerr had gotten wind that he was about to be arrested and threatened Leonard that he would implicate him too if he got busted. So on the planned day of the arrest, Leonard got in his car and brought Jimmy along with him to drive to Kerr's home. Jimmy said that Leonard initially planned to shoot Kerr out of anger, but he talked Leonard out of it. Leonard Gosch instead just ended up tipping off Kerr about the impending arrest. Although Leonard apparently told Jimmy that the criminal enterprise Kerr was blackmailing him over was illegal gambling, there's a good chance of that being a euphemism for child trafficking. Kerr was clearly implicated as owning a safe house used to store trafficked kids. Furthermore, Leonard was most likely only able to tip off Kerr because Noreen told him of the impending arrest, and she in turn must have heard about it from the county attorney, who would not have informed her unless their investigation was related to the abduction of Johnny, again indicating that Kerr was being investigated for child trafficking. Jimmy's story then indicates that Kerr and Leonard were both acquainted through a pedophile ring, and Kerr was able to blackmail Leonard with evidence of his involvement. Back in 2004, when he was posting under the name CPP Web, Jimmy claimed that, just like Noreen alleged in her book, the Gosch home did receive a phone call in the early morning hours of September 5th, 82, and it came from the Sioux City area. Given how Charlie Kerr is the Gosch's case main link to Sioux City and the alleged association between him and Leonard, if Jimmy was telling the truth about the phone call, Kerr is very likely to have been the caller. And for Kerr, one of the kidnappers, to be calling Leonard just before Johnny's abduction would imply that Kerr was making arrangements with Johnny's father regarding the kidnapping. Noreen has in fact claimed that Bonacci testified in court that the kidnappers had prior arrangements with Johnny's father to ensure that Johnny would be alone that morning. This does not show up in the publicly released court transcripts, but Noreen's delivery has enough authenticity, even asking her interviewer at one point, "Were you surprised when you heard that in court?" to raise the question of whether the transcripts accurately reflect the entirety of the 1999 hearing. The allegation that Kerr had blackmail material on Leonard might also, if Kerr was the one making arrangements with Leonard, explain Noreen's account of Leonard's very odd behavior in 1982 leading up to Johnny's abduction. He allegedly exhibited tremendous stress and even suicidal tendencies, consistent with the possibility that he was being blackmailed to facilitate the kidnapping of his own son. Being a longtime member of a pedophile ring, as numerous victims and witnesses claim, would easily provide such blackmail material. It is noteworthy that the array of witnesses implicating Leonard, Rusty Nelson, Noreen Gosch, Paul Bonacci, Dave Schurter, Jimmy Gibson, Darren Reimer, have their own rivalries and would not be inclined to conspire together in a hoax implicating Johnny's father. The fact that multiple people otherwise opposed to each other have made overlapping allegations about John Gosch Sr. strengthens those allegations. Obviously, however, they have not been proven definitively. Leonard's 1999 challenge to Doreen's account of Johnny visiting might have been unintentionally revealing. He insisted that if Johnny came back to West Des Moines to visit his parents, Johnny would have visited his childhood home, which Leonard was still living in at the time. Yet Leonard did not receive a visit from Johnny. For Johnny to forego visiting his old home but make an effort to track down Noreen at her new address would be bizarre, except for the possibility Leonard did not address. Johnny was specifically avoiding his father. If the visit from Johnny was real, then by Leonard's own logic, Johnny had some reason not to want to see his father. This is consistent with allegations that Leonard was involved in Franklin, something that Johnny could have easily learned by virtue of being in the same pedophile ring. Wow. So I mean, yeah, this is mind shocking. This is a whole new level of mind shock here. I don't know if the Mindshock listeners were expecting this level of mind shocking material. The connections here are so damning. I mean, the timeline, if it's all true, of course. If it's not true, then there's more to be explored. I mean, there's more to be explored either way. We're still not even done with this theory. There's actually a few other suspects that have nothing to do with this theory. It's hard to disprove this trafficking angle when you have this many PIs, Ted Gunderson, all of these witnesses with information that wasn't publicly released. It's tough to just completely write it off. I know a lot of coincidence theorists love to just write it off because, I mean, they are too mentally weak. You have to have a certain amount of mental strength to understand that there's this level of darkness and criminality and just straight up scumbag people in this world, and it's just not a safe world. And it's easier, of course, to believe that it's all fake, right? Because then you could just continue living in fairy tale land where it's something this bad and these vast networks couldn't exist. It's more soothing to believe that. I mean, obviously, like, I get it. I get it. It's easier to be mentally weak. Unfortunately, criminal scumbags that do these things and human trafficking does still exist. Unfortunately. So if you're out for the truth, you have to examine all these theories. So yeah, this is obviously going to be the beginning of a series. We have so much more to go over. So I'll be continuing this in episode 2. Plenty more evidence to go over. Hope you guys found another edition of Mindshock interesting and informative. If you want to help support the Mindshock podcast, help us get more mind-shocking content out there, keep up awareness in missing persons cases, cold cases of all kinds, and wrongful convictions, you could donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Support the channel that way. Get access to exclusive streams and chats. Like and share the podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.